Audiobook, Depopulation Agenda. The Macabre Plans for Global Population Reduction. By Milco Baute. Written and published in 2022. The horses and riders I saw in my vision looked like this: their breastplates were fiery red, dark blue, and yellow as sulfur. The heads of the horses resembled the heads of lions, and out of their mouths came fire, smoke and sulfur. A third of mankind was killed by the three plagues of fire, smoke and sulfur that came out of their mouths. The power of the horses was in their mouths and in their tails, for their tails were like snakes, having heads with which they inflict injury. The rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues still did not repent of the work of their hands. They did not stop worshipping demons, and idols of gold, silver, bronze, stone and wood, idols that cannot see or hear or walk. Nor did they repent of their murders, their magic arts, their sexual immorality or their thefts. Revelation 9:17-21. Introduction. For some time now, there has been talk of plans to reduce the world's population, with the excuse of the danger of overpopulation to which we are heading in the not-so-distant future. However, this is nothing more than a flawed concept, a trap for global dominance, and a manipulation of reality they want us to believe. It intends to psychologically prepare us for the future and the measures or laws that will have to be implemented to preserve the planet and the survival of species. The truth is that we live on a planet large enough, spacious, and rich in natural resources to sustain all species. The issue lies in the unequal distribution of land and resources. Human beings concentrate in cities and towns, ignoring vast, uninhabited spaces. While establishing communities in these areas would take time, resources, and significant capital to provide public services, it would also be harder to control. If these communities were to form naturally, as is the case in many parts of the earth where indigenous tribes live, disconnected from society, with their own laws and way of life, without utilizing services like electricity, clean water, and other services and products that can be monetized, then there would be no need to overpopulate cities or territories. But of course, almost no one would want to live that way. In the 21st century, everyone wants to live as people did in the 20th century, with access to everything, even if it comes at a cost. That's the dilemma and the problem: we are overpopulating specific territories, not the planet Earth as a whole. However, one of the absurd ideas to reduce the world's population is to concentrate people in large cities while depopulating rural and urban areas. This demonstrates that the real intention is to control us better and prevent the population living outside of cities, and that strict control from rebelling against the laws that will be imposed and taking control of land by force, thus organizing themselves to fight against these progressive tyrannies. There is enough on this planet for everyone. God is wise, and He has provided a lifetime for all. It is true that some families have more children than others, despite their low standard of living. Many do not learn the lesson and continue with this cycle of chronic ignorance, without thinking about the future or realizing the consequences of bringing children into the world to suffer because they lack the resources to provide the necessary quality of life for their growth and development. That's why they migrate to cities and countries in search of a better life, carrying their burden elsewhere or even having to abandon their children and leave them in the care of relatives or other people who may not have a moral responsibility before God or society, in many cases, to raise other people's children. Then, these migrants, unable to support themselves or their families because they have not been able to improve themselves, transcend, learn something useful like a trade profession, or simply lack of the mental capacity and basic knowledge to be productive in any way, seek government assistance. That is the grave mistake of many that can be avoided. I can speak for myself as an example, because I cannot speak for others. In my particular case, when I wanted to have children, I had them. In the 15 years of my marriage, I didn't even need to use contraceptives, let alone if my wife had to resort to forced abortion to address the mistake of having more children at the wrong time. And even if that were to happen, God is faithful and sustains us because we depend on Him entirely, and He has never failed us. I do not consider myself poor or rich. I am simply a person who earns like a poor person but lives like a rich one, because I enjoy the life that God has given me, my family and my time with my family, what I do, and without rushing to earn more or to invest my family's time, my rest, or my pleasures just to accumulate wealth and meaningless possessions that vanish. Life is not about accumulating things, properties, or temporary pleasures one can indulge in, but about living it to the fullest, raising children, sharing, helping others, and being content with who you are and what you have. No more is needed. Money is just a tool for public use. It does not belong to anyone, but many only think of making and accumulating wealth, vain things that disappear. It is logical for parents to think about the future of their children, but it's not necessarily about property, a career, or wealth that they need. Providing them with health, education, and quality time together is what matters. They don't need everything handed to them, they must learn to make an effort on their own. We believe that by indebting ourselves, we will secure a better future for them. However, in reality, we end up burdening them more because they have to take care of their parents who are sick due to stress, anxiety, physical exhaustion, and in many cases, the debt left by their parents, if they want to preserve what has been invested. People who are meant to be born will be born, and those meant to die will die. This is how God maintains control and order over everything, and the planet naturally renews itself. No one should take God's place and decide who lives and who doesn't. The reduction of the population is not a new idea of the current century or the previous century, the 20th century we just left behind. It's an ancient idea, a plan, and a concept that has been in practice, even if we don't realize it. Conquest wars, trivial wars, wars between nations, world wars, civil wars, biological warfare, weapons of mass destruction created to subdue others and reduce entire populations, climate warfare to produce atmospheric changes and disasters, biological warfare, laboratory-created diseases, abortion, terrorist attacks, massacres, many of them funded and promoted by malevolent human entities and a globalist elite with the aim of depopulating the planet. I dare to say and assert that the terrorist attack on September 11 in the United States was not only planned and executed by enemies of America but also allowed by the then current government and warned by the previous government of George W. Bush, i.e., the administration of Bill Clinton. Furthermore, I am one of those who believe and assert that there was internal collaboration between the two major political parties and both presidents. The pure steel buildings of the World Trade Center, designed to withstand any fire, atmospheric disaster, or even attacks, seem to be demolished rather than brought down by commercial airplanes used as projectiles. There are many witnesses who were there and heard internal explosions, not due to gas or any other type of fuel that could have remained inside the buildings. Those two buildings were intentionally brought down internally, under the pretext of entering into a military conflict, ending the threat of the terrorist group Al-Qaeda, which was financed by the U.S. government during Clinton's time, but lost control of them, and they became its worst enemy due to differences in plans, ideals, religious customs, culture, and, above all, going to war with Iraq, which was seen as an obstacle and a threat to preserving U.S. oil interests in Kuwait and that Persian Gulf region. However, this further awakened the sleeping giant and fueled various violent groups in the region, leading to the emergence of the Islamic State, known as ISIS, which consists of radical terrorist groups from Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and other jihadists from around the world who have joined them. Saddam Hussein had control of the region because he was a dictator with a well-armed and prepared army, a cruel and unprincipled man, but at least he was there to keep all these extremist groups in the Middle East in control, including the nation of Iran, with which he engaged in armed conflict for several years, resulting in the loss of about 2 million soldiers from both nations. But Saddam Hussein definitely had Iran well under control, a nation that has now become the planet's worst danger because it possesses weapons of mass destruction or plans to develop them. A nation that has always declared that the State of Israel must disappear from the map and has perpetrated attacks against it in the past. Population reduction has also been implemented for a long time against indigenous communities worldwide and various African countries through experimentation, virus dissemination, and the spread of diseases created for this purpose, as well as atmospheric changes created with chemical weaponry. Populated regions have been used as experimental zones, and all sorts of atrocities have been carried out in secret, sometimes with moral and financial support from international entities like the UN and the globalist elites. When human rights groups and organizations have become aware of this and formally protested, they have been silenced and denied. Being an independent journalist or activist for the rights of the oppressed and the vulnerable around the world is currently a dangerous profession, and not necessarily due to internal conflicts, terrorist groups, or territorial customs that these individuals must face, but because of a powerful and well-organized elite with paid hitmen or witnesses to eliminate these obstacles. There is a group of people right now in an office, or in any corner of the planet, planning and devising strategies to reduce the world's population, making it easier for the globalist elites to dominate and enrich themselves. They want to control us all and dominate the world, creating a political, economic, and religious empire. But with nearly 8 billion inhabitants on the planet, soon to be 15 billion if the accelerated growth of the world's population continues, it is very difficult to control everyone, dominate the world, and ensure that resources are greater for some but lesser for others. Corrupt, wicked, greedy, and ambitious individuals do not seek to share the earth's riches that God gave us to inhabit but to appropriate all its resources and distribute them as they see fit. In my book, What They Don't Want You to Know, I explain these reasons and who this global elite is that seeks to dominate the planet, and they don't want people to be informed, learn, transcend, or prosper. Instead, they want to keep us at a low level of mediocrity, making us more manipulable and controllable, making us dependent on them, offering distraction, entertainment, morbidity, and a culture of diversity and perversion so that we lose awareness and values. The purpose of the globalist elite is to maintain or increase their wealth. And in my book, Globalism and the New World Order, I explain in detail who makes up this elite, and from a spiritual perspective, globalism becomes the reign of the Antichrist, the ideology of the New World Order, and globalization, monopolization of resources and wealth, becomes the mark of the beast, Revelation 13. The truth is that, even if they insist that these are just conspiracy theories, all those who make up these groups, organizations, agencies, or entities, whether politicians, investors, businessmen, sheiks, dictators, scientists, philosophers, people in power, who have control over wealth and its distribution, have spoken extensively about the danger of overpopulation and have warned that measures must be taken now, even if they are drastic, to preserve the planet we live on, and the survival of the human race and all species, many of which are endangered or at risk of extinction. They also openly announce the need to create a new world order, with the unification of world leaders from the major powers, those who can establish this new order and dictate laws for its effectiveness, as well as the rulers of all other countries that depend on those who control the world economy, to enforce these laws in each nation, starting with the World Economic Forum with the alliance and support of megacorporations. Example: BlackRock and Vanguard, the United Nations, the Vatican, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the European Community, the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, a treaty similar to the TTIP, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, etc. Basically, all these globalists are those who believes that everyone should compromise their religions and accept what the state, a new world order state, wants everyone to accept. Former President of the United States, Barack Obama, Pope Francis, and the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, are globalists. Many members of the major political parties in the United States are globalists, as are many in the European Union. Globalists want to redefine society based on the human reasoning of the elite's ruling classes. They believe that more government control and the merging of religious views are the main keys to this. Basically, they do not believe that God has standards that people really need to adhere to, and they believe that a more enlightened humanity will produce some kind of utopia for planet Earth. They do not really believe in the coming kingdom of God as the source of peace and prosperity, spiritually speaking. The prophecies. Will globalists succeed? Yes, according to biblical prophecy. The European beast of the sea will rise, Revelation 13:1, destroy the United States and its Anglo-Saxon descendant allies, Daniel 11:39, and be worshipped by the world. And the whole world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity, he who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, his number is 666. Revelation 13, 3-18. After the fall of the United States, Daniel 11 verse 39, the whole world will marvel and follow the globalist agenda. However, it should be noted that the Bible also shows that those in the lands of the Middle East and North Africa will not do so for long, as many will unsuccessfully rebel, according to Daniel 11. 40-43. Later, the Russians and Asians will successfully rebel against it, Daniel 11, 44 and 45, Jeremiah 50, 41-43. The Bible shows that parts of the globalist agenda will be implemented. For a time, many will think that humanity has resolved its major problems, see the covenant with many, in Daniel 9:27. However, it will bring about a sudden destruction for many, 1 Thessalonians 5:3, and ultimately, it will self-destruct, see Daniel 2:44, Revelation 17:14. When Jesus returns, the globalists will gather in a way they had not done before and will fight against him. However, this will not succeed. And I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse. And he who sat on him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness, he judges and makes war. His eyes were like a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. He had a name written that no one knew except himself. He was clothed with a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. Now out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, that with it he should strike the nations. And he himself will rule them with a rod of iron. He himself treads the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty God. And he has on his robe and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds that fly in the midst of heaven, Come and gather together for the supper of the great God, that you may eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses and of those who sit on them, and the flesh of all people, free and slave, both small and great. And I saw the beast, the kings of the earth, and their armies, gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. Then the beast was captured and with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. These two were cast alive into the lake of fire burning with brimstone. And the rest were killed with the sword which proceeded from the mouth of him who sat on the horse. And all the birds were filled with their flesh. Revelation 19:11-21. Jesus will bring an end to the transhumanistic globalist agenda and implement God's millennial kingdom. The Feast of Tabernacles, which began today, symbolically represents the end of Satan's inspired, New World Order, and the related globalist agenda. Why does the global elite insist on decreasing the world's population? Our generation is witnessing an increasingly visible battle between those who want a single world government in the hands of a technocratic elite with collectivist and authoritarian criteria, and on the other hand, those who continue to defend human freedom and natural order. It has been prophesied that there will be a world government ruled by forces opposed to God, and we are heading in that direction. God is being expelled from societies, morals are changing, and even our DNA is being altered. The choice of who lives and who dies has begun, and fear is growing among the global population. They are like sheep without a shepherd. But this is just the beginning of the elite's plan, which, at the instigation of the malevolent, wants to rid humanity. Therefore, everything points to the fact that in no more than 50 years, the vast majority of the population will be utterly useless and a nuisance to those who are taking control of the world. Phase 1, World Government. We are witnessing a strong push for world government. Advocates of this global governance are recruited from among former supporters and operatives of socialist regimes, international bureaucracies, major economic groups, academics dependent on their funding, marginalized sectors that have been empowered, such as homosexuals, feminists, anarchists, etc. This battle is for power on the planet and defines which morality will be applied among men. The battleground includes issues like natural order, abortion, homosexuality, global warming, world depopulation, sexualization of relationships, gender equality, and more. As can be seen in the news, global governance is always on the offensive, while those who want to preserve human freedom and natural order can only defend small parcels to prevent them from being taken away. The growth of this movement largely stems from utopian notions of world perfectibility. They argue that humanity's tendency toward violent conflicts, unequal wealth distribution, and environmental degradation can only be cured by pronouncements from a council of wise men, who dictate how conflicts will be resolved and how the world's assets will be distributed. The common elements that unite global governance advocates today are quite clear. Belief that the nation-state is obsolete or in imminent decline. Rejection of capitalist economies and the role of free enterprise. Deep distrust of common forms of human organization, including democratic self-governance and the nuclear family. Acceptance of the idea that there is international consensus that all nations and peoples have common objectives. Disdain for all forms of organized religion, especially Christianity, unless they can manipulate them. Unwillingness to tolerate opposition of any kind. These advocates of global governance paint a rosy picture of a world in which human happiness will be ensured once differences among peoples, whether in terms of gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or ability, are eradicated. However, the collectivist experiments of the 20th century in the USSR and its communist satellite regimes miserably failed to create material happiness, except for a small elite, and resulted only in the impoverishment of one-solid economies, heavy regulation, imprisonment of enemies of the state, and mass murder of millions of people. This battle that global governance is waging worldwide to impose its authoritarian and ecological supranational state has the following agents. Multilateral organizations like the United Nations. Most ruling elites in first world countries. It is funded by large economic groups seeking more unbridled power and resources. It uses science and universities to produce spurious technical reports, such as global warming. And it controls major media outlets that disseminate what this conglomerate of power defines as politically correct. Why does the global elite need the majority of the world's population? In this scenario, what role does the majority of the world's population play? The term useless eaters has been coined. As the elite directs technological progress toward singularity, the merging of man with machine, most people will no longer have a purpose for themselves. They may not even be able to function in a new world controlled by a scientific dictatorship. Therefore, the ruling classes have formally decided to initiate, in fact and naturally, an extermination program. In the coming decades, all functions performed by what can be called the lower classes will be carried out by robots. Due to improved techniques, the elite will have greater control over the masses, and because human labor will no longer be needed, the masses will be superfluous, a useless burden in the system. If the elite is ruthless, they can simply decide to exterminate the mass of humanity. If they are humane, they can use propaganda or other psychological or biological techniques to reduce the birth rate until the mass of humanity is extinguished, leaving the world in the size and shape that suits the elite. The other equally chilling scenario for humanity is a brave new world in which every human action and behavior is regulated by a scientific dictatorship. If the elite consists of soft-hearted liberals, they may decide to play the role of good shepherds with the rest of the human race. They will ensure that everyone's physical needs are met, that all children are raised in conditions of psychological hygiene, and that everyone has a healthy pastime to keep them busy. And anyone who might be dissatisfied will undergo treatment to cure their problem. Of course, life will be so meaningless that people will have to be biologically or psychologically designed to eliminate their need for power or make it sublimated by a harmless hobby. These designed humans may be happy in such a society, but they will not be free. They will have been reduced to the condition of domesticated animals. The elite sees themselves as the legitimate heirs to control human evolution. They literally want to play God with the future of the species. The decision that has now been made is to confine humanity within compact cities and gradually limit their resources by charging more for less. This post-industrial revolution serves to drastically reduce living standards, creating an even greater gap between the super-rich and the poor and facilitating the creation of a new oligarchy. The elite has become obsessed with eugenics and its modern incarnation, population control. The goal of reducing the world's population is still in effect today. In recent conferences at the Vatican, proponents of this trend have been invited to speak, and one of them, Jeffrey Sachs, even serves as an advisor to the Vatican. In the second half of the 20th century, eugenics simply changed its face to become known as population control. This crystallized in National Security Study Memorandum 200, a 1974 document prepared by geopolitical strategist, close friend, and Rockefeller associate Henry Kissinger, a member of the Bilderberg Club. He selected 13 countries for massive population reduction through the creation of food scarcity, sterilization, and war. The declassified document from 1989 identified 13 countries of particular interest to U.S. geopolitical objectives and explained why population growth, especially among young people, was seen as a revolutionary threat to U.S. corporations. They were a potential obstacle to achieving these objectives. The countries mentioned were India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nigeria, Mexico, Indonesia, Brazil, the Philippines, Thailand, Egypt, Turkey, Ethiopia, and Colombia. The report describes how civil disturbances will be less likely to occur under conditions of slow or zero population growth. The document called for integrating family planning, also known as abortion, into routine health services to curb the number of people in less advanced countries, less developed countries. The report surprisingly describes how food withholding could be used as a means of punishment for less developed countries that do not act to reduce their population. Essentially, using food as a weapon for a political agenda by creating massive famine in underdeveloped countries. The program, as the document suggests, would be administered by the United Nations Fund for Population Activities, UNFPA. This would avoid the danger that some leaders might see developed countries pressuring developing countries to adopt family planning as a form of economic or racial imperialism, which could provoke a serious reaction. Everything suggests that the elite's plan for the future does not include United States. The global elite has come to a decision that could mean the end of humanity as we know it in the decades to come. Most of the population will have become superfluous in the eyes of those planning to impose a technocracy worldwide. Robots will be used to replace or eliminate humans as they progress toward the beloved technological singularity. With the vast majority of humans obsolete in the eyes of the controllers, the result of this change will easily surpass even the impact of the Industrial Revolution. The decades beyond 2019 will be characterized by the problem of the growth of the subhuman class that will not be economically productive, according to inventor and futurist Ray Kurzweil, Google's director of technology. From 2029 onward, the elite will see their dream of achieving singularity, humans merged with machines, beginning to take real shape. Computers and cell phones will now be implanted in people's eyes and ears. The broader trend of the elite will see humans as entirely dispensable since their functions are absorbed by machines that are now being developed. There's virtually no human employment in production, agriculture, and transportation, says Kurzweil. In 2099, the entire planet is controlled by artificial intelligence computer systems that are smarter than the entire human race combined, similar to the Skynet system in the Terminator fiction. Humans who have resisted modifying themselves to become part cyborg will be isolated from society. Even among those who continue to use human neuron-based intelligences, there is widespread use of neural implant technology, which provides a huge increase in human perceptual and cognitive abilities. Humans who don't use these implants won't be able to participate meaningfully in the dialogues that the others have, writes Kurzweil. Kurzweil's future represents the ultimate goal of the elite, the elimination of the existing order and its replacement with a dystopian high-tech technocracy. Instead of being used to empower and advance humanity, technology will be used to further widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots, with the have-nots eventually being completely eliminated. This seems to be the final plan, starting with a world government that will protect and promote this technological trend and the reduction of useless eaters. United Nations Agenda 2030, the true objectives behind their 17 new Sustainable Development Goals. Since these supposedly non-binding international agreements can sometimes be a bit tricky to decode, what with all the weaponized buzz terms and semantics games, we've prepared a handy-dandy translator on the 17 new Agenda 2030 goals below. Goal 1, End poverty in all its forms everywhere. Translation: Centralized banks, IMF, World Bank, Fed to control all finances, digital one world currency in a cashless society. Goal 2, End hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Translation: GMO. Goal 3, ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. Translation: mass vaccination, Codex Alimentarius. Goal 4, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Translation: UN propaganda, brainwashing through compulsory education from cradle to grave. Goal 5, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. Translation: population control through forced family planning. Goal 6, ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. Translation: privatize all water sources, don't forget to add fluoride. Goal 7, ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. Translation: smart grid with smart meters on everything, peak pricing. Goal 8, promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. Translation: TPP, free trade zones that favor megacorporate interests. Goal 9, build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization and foster innovation. Translation: toll roads, push public transit, remove free travel, environmental restrictions. Goal 10, reduce inequality within and among countries. Translation: even more regional government bureaucracy like a mutant octopus. Goal 11, make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable. Translation: Big Brother Big Data Surveillance State. Goal 12, ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. Translation: forced austerity. Goal 13, take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. Translation, cap and trade, carbon taxes credits, footprint taxes, aka Al Gore's wet dream. Goal 14, conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. Translation, environmental restrictions, control all oceans including mineral rights from ocean floors. Goal 15, protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation and halt biodiversity loss. Translation, more environmental restrictions, more controlling resources and mineral rights. Goal 16, promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. Translation, UN Peacekeeping Missions, X1, X2, the International Court of Blind Justice, force people together via fake refugee crises and then mediate with more UN peacekeeping when tension breaks out to gain more control over a region, remove Second Amendment in USA. Goal 17, strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. Translation, remove national sovereignty worldwide, and promote globalism under the authority and bloated, Orwellian bureaucracy of the UN. Of course, these goals are unattainable, but that's beside the point. For the global elite, the point isn't to improve the world, the point is to control it. And who better control the people of the world than those dictators in waiting at the United Nations? Abortion and family planning. One could mention induced or forced abortion as a legal method to reduce the world's population, but in reality, abortion is far more sinister than that. Because what sense does it make to apply abortions to mothers who do not want or cannot have their children in order to reduce the world's population when schools teach sex education, along with everything that the entertainment industry offers, encouraging children and adolescents to engage in early sexual relationships, to experiment with their bodies, and choose their partners, even if they are of the same sex? It doesn't make sense. Why not teach them the moral values of marriage, family, studying to excel, to achieve goals, and provide a better future for their family when they are ready to have one? In countries like Spain, pornography is shown in schools to teenagers, and in some schools in the United States, they not only teach about sex but also engage in sexual practices and shows, including with young people of the same sex. Clearly, the rise of abortion in our days has a spiritual and satanic background. Although abortion has been practiced since ancient times, the first legalization of abortion in the world took place in the Soviet Union in 1920. Following that, other communist countries followed suit, 1956 in Poland, Hungary, and Bulgaria, 1957 in Czechoslovakia. Among democratic countries, Sweden authorized abortion in 1938, but only for very exceptional cases. The law that fully legalized abortion was passed in 1975. In 1954, the International Planned Parenthood Federation, founded by Margaret Sanger in the United States, advocated for a global movement from powerful countries to push dependent countries to legalize abortion. In 1967, the American Medical Association removed abortion from the list of malpractices, and several states accepted it as a legitimate surgical intervention in certain cases. The spread of the doctrine on abortion was carried out by the United States. Legislative momentum gained strength when, on February 22, 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a liberalizing judgment in the case of Doe v. Bolton, which reinforced the Roe v. Wade decision. This last judgment abandoned the type of justification that had been used until then, which mainly referred to the logic of the state of necessity, danger to the mother's health. Now, the argument would be that the right to personal privacy includes the decision to have an abortion. The 3-month limit is based on a statistical fact: abortion is less dangerous than childbirth for women in the first 90 days of pregnancy. For this reason, European Union member states cannot impose restrictions on free choice. Any limits placed on other time frames must be based on a danger to the life of the mother. The situation is not stable and continues to expand or contract. Some U.S. states are legislating in favor of restricting or even banning abortion. Recently, both the United States and Japan have legislated to consider fetal harm a crime. The partial birth abortion has been banned in the United States. In Great Britain, abortion was decriminalized with the Abortion Act in 1967. The decision in the United States led to the implementation of legislations allowing abortion in France, Austria, and Sweden, 1975, Germany and Denmark, 1976, Luxembourg, 1978, the Netherlands, 1981, Portugal, 1984, Spain, 1985, Greece, 1986, and finally Belgium, 1990. Poland has undergone a significant shift in abortion incidence by changing the legislation. Although it maintains decriminalization for some cases, it strengthens support for pregnant women and penalizes healthcare personnel who do not strictly comply with the law, not the woman. The situation in Central and South America is currently in the process of definition, as there are strong tensions between maintaining the widespread defense of fetal life and therefore banning abortion or advancing in the path of decriminalization and legalization of voluntary pregnancy termination. Mexico City in 2007 became the first place in Latin America, aside from Cuba, where abortion was legalized. In Africa, the leading abortion country is the Republic of South Africa, where abortion legislation was passed in 1997. It is also important to note the pro-abortion legislation in India and China, both with a primary focus on birth control. Abortion is perhaps the most controversial political issue in the world today, transcending across cultures and nations. While in many countries, as we have seen, pro-abortion laws were passed, in many others, the right to life was enshrined. In Ireland, a constitutional reform was passed in a referendum in 1983, sanctioning the criminality of abortion. In several former communist countries, the shift has been made from having pro-abortion legislation to reversing those laws in favor of life, as in the cases of Poland, Croatia, or Slovakia. In the 1990s, both El Salvador and Argentina, as well as Santo Domingo in 2009, changed constitutional laws to protect life from the moment of conception. In Mexico, in reaction to legislation introduced in the federal district, 18 states have amended their constitutions to stipulate the inviolability of human life and protect it from abortion. Regardless of the nature of the current legislation, abortion is a recurring topic of political and social debate worldwide. From the 3rd to the 4th centuries, until the early 20th century, the enculturation of Christianity emphasized two principles: the conception of life as a gift from God and the consideration of the radical equality of all human beings. These principles permeated culture and led to the rejection of any form of abortion. The early Christian authors condemned any attack on human life, and especially abortion. This is why the Church has a moral duty in the world to instruct and demand God's order on earth. This is why possessions, legislations, testimonies, and judgments are solemnly made in accordance with this divine order in most countries. Nations that prioritize God or conform to His order are blessed, while those who turn their backs on the Creator or commit abominations, sorcery, or acts of depravity against moral principles of creation are cursed, subject to divine judgment, and may suffer spiritual, economic, political, and social catastrophes, losses, or misery. The further they distance themselves from God, the more sin they add to their judgments. Abortion is a sacrifice of children to Satan. Much has been said about secret societies that rule and control the world. The Illuminati, an elite group that knows no government or borders, is mentioned more frequently these days, consisting of the world's richest individuals, like the Bilderberg Club, along with all the entities, organizations, and political leaders imposed and funded by this elite. Founded in May 1776, this group includes Freemasons, Jesuits, philosophers, monarchs, and others, a group of greedy Satanists who sold their souls to the devil for power and domination. Dissolved in 1785, it was later regrouped and reorganized. It is also known as the Order of the Bees, Union of the Illuminated, and the Order of the Illuminati. These secret societies trace back to the Middle Ages, to the time of the Knights Templar, but it was Adam Weishaupt, a 28-year-old professor of ecclesiastical law and practical philosophy at the University of Ingolstadt in Bavaria, who made it known as the Illuminati or the Illuminated Masters of Bavaria, along with two of his students from the Perfectibilists Association. The goal was to improve and perfect the world in terms of freedom, equality, and fraternity, as well as the improvement and perfection of their members, hence the old name, Perfectibilists. Weishaupt wrote in 1782 in a speech, "Anyone who generally wants to be initiated into freedom, broad enlightenment in general, but enlightenment does not consist in the knowledge of words, but of things. It is not about understanding abstract, speculative, theoretical knowledge, which inflates the spirit, but does not improve the heart." These secret societies were responsible for the French Revolution, which later gave rise to socialist and Marxist ideas. Although dissolved in the 18th century as the Illuminated Masters of Bavaria, they never ceased to exist. Instead, they strengthened and became modern globalists. They are also attributed to the socialist revolution in Russia, the emergence of fascism, progressivism, the First and Second World Wars, and the imposition of a new world order, among many other atrocities. These secret societies have a spiritual origin and are instruments of the evil mastermind Satan. These power-hungry individuals have sold their souls to the devil, so they also need to perform satanic rituals to accomplish their goals and gain the protection of the god of this world, which is Satan. In a modern and civilized society like the one we live in, barbaric acts, crimes, or human sacrifices cannot be openly committed, so they need to legalize them, using human laws to carry out these sacrifice rituals. This is why there is such insistence, persistence, and demand for pro-abortion movements, misleadingly called family planning, Planned Parenthood, because it has nothing to do with family planning but rather with the genocide of unborn children. Today's abortion is nothing more than a sacrifice of children to the god Moloch by those who have sold their souls to the devil, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Satanists have always existed and have become powerful since ancient times by selling their souls to the devil, just as the first monarch in history, Nimrod, who was the first to offer human sacrifices, create pagan monuments, and establish a cult of personality. The Bible clearly describes Satan as the god of this world in 2 Corinthians 4:4, in whose case the god of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving so that they might not see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Satan even offered Jesus, the Son of God, all the kingdoms of the world if he would sell his soul and worship him. He dared to challenge God incarnate. However, Jesus responded with the Word of God, the same Word that created the heavens and the earth, Matthew 4:8-10. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan. For it is written, Worship the Lord your God, and serve him only." Today's abortion is not the same as what was proposed in the 1970s in the United States, which was only allowed in cases of endangering the mother's health, and later expanded to cases of fetal health risks and deformations if it occurred within the first 40 days of gestation. It was later extended to 12 weeks. However, for 2019, in New York and probably in other places, abortion has been allowed up to the moment of birth, not necessarily for health reasons, but simply as a human sacrifice to Satan. In such circumstances, the only difference between abortion and childbirth or a cesarean section is that in abortion, the child must be deliberately killed. At that stage, the child is too large to be dismembered inside the uterus, as is done in earlier cases through dilation and curettage. Therefore, labor is induced, and when the child is still immature, the unattended process of labor ends its life. However, since this method can fail, injections of potassium chloride are used inside the uterus to stop the baby's heart, or a saline poisoning method is employed. In the saline method, a concentrated salt solution is injected into the amniotic fluid, which the baby swallows and dies, burned internally by the concentrated saline solution. Once the baby has died, labor is induced, and the small corpse is removed. In the United States, many states also allow partial birth abortion. This involves dilating the cervix and inducing labor by pulling the child out by the feet. In the United States, if the child's head emerges and is still alive, it is considered born alive, and there is an obligation to care for it to ensure its survival. Therefore, the child is removed by the feet, and when everything but the head has emerged, still kicking and moving, a puncture is made in the base of the skull from behind, causing death, and the small body is left limp in the abortionist's hand, who can then pull out the head. If the same procedure were done without puncturing the skull, the child would be considered born alive, and care would be required. Family planning, Planned Parenthood. Hillary Clinton, while serving as Secretary of State during the Obama administration, received the Margaret Sanger Award from Planned Parenthood, named after the founder of the American Birth Control League, which changed its name to Planned Parenthood in the 1940s. In her remarks, Clinton praised the namesake of the award. "Now, I have to tell you that it was a great privilege when I was told I would receive this award. I greatly admire Margaret Sanger, her courage, her tenacity, her vision. And when I think about what she did so many years ago in Brooklyn, taking on archetypes, taking on attitudes and accusations flowing from all directions, I am truly in awe of her." Clinton lamented that Margaret Sanger's work here in the United States and certainly around our world is not yet done. Here at home, there are still too many women denied their rights because of income, because of opposition, and because of the attitudes they hold. But around the world, too many women are denied even the opportunity to learn how to plan and space their families. They are denied the power to do anything about their most intimate decisions. Sanger, of course, was not the benevolent advocate for human rights that Clinton's comments make her out to be. In fact, Sanger's vision for birth control seems to be linked to a eugenic vision. In the October 1921 edition of the Birth Control Review, Sanger wrote that the campaign for birth control is not merely of eugenic value, but is practically identical with the final aims of eugenics. Sanger outlined the principles and aims of the American Birth Control League in an appendix to her 1922 work, The Pivot of Civilization. 2.5 pages are devoted to the principles of the American Birth Control League, which begins. The complex problems now confronting the United States at this time as the result of the practice of reckless procreation are fast threatening to grow beyond human control. Everywhere we see poverty and large families going hand in hand. Those least fit to carry on the race are increasing most rapidly. People who cannot support their own offspring are encouraged by church and state to produce large families. Many of the children thus begotten are diseased or feeble-minded. Many become criminals. The burden of supporting these unwanted types has to be borne by the healthy elements of the nation. Funds that should be used to raise the standard of our civilization are diverted to the maintenance of those who should never have been born. Of the 11 objectives of the American Birth Control League outlined by Sanger after an explanation of its principles, only 2 are not directly related to the problem that Sanger called dysgenic reproduction. One of the most striking objectives of the ABCL is the sterilization of the mentally unfit and the encouragement of this operation on those afflicted with inherited or transmissible diseases, with the understanding that sterilization does not deprive the individual of his or her sex expression but merely renders him or her incapable of producing children. The truth is that Sanger was a racist who advocated for a movement to get rid of the undesirables, which could include the disabled, African Americans, and nearly all other groups of people. Between Racism and Infanticide, 10 controversial quotes from the founder of Planned Parenthood, by David Ramos. A.C.I. Prensa. Planned Parenthood, the world's largest abortion multinational, has been in the spotlight in recent days after the revelation of the trafficking of organs from aborted babies in its facilities. State and congressional investigations are underway, and a bill is progressing in Parliament to withdraw the more than $500 million in government funding it receives each year. The Center for Medical Progress, CMP, released a second video accusing Planned Parenthood, the world's largest abortion multinational, of selling organs. But Planned Parenthood's controversial policies have their roots almost a century ago, with its founder Margaret Higgins Sanger, a staunch advocate of racist and eugenic policies for birth control. Not in vain, as various pro-life leaders have denounced, abortion clinics focus their activities in poor and racial minority neighborhoods, such as the Hispanic and African American populations in the United States. 10 controversial quotes from the founder of Planned Parenthood that could help understand how they came to sell organs from aborted babies. We don't want word to get out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. Margaret Sanger in a December 1939 letter to Dr. Clarence Gamble about her Negro Project, which sought to reduce the African American population in the United States through birth control policies. Contraception means the release and cultivation of the best racial elements in our society, and the gradual suppression, elimination, and eventual extirpation of defective lives, those human weeds which threaten the blooming of the finest flowers of American civilization. In the article, Birth Control Apostle Sees Cause Gaining Here, in the New York Times, April 8, 1923. I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Interview with Mike Wallace for ABC on September 21, 1957. Eugenics is the most adequate and thorough avenue to the solution of racial, political, and social problems. In The Eugenic Value of Birth Control Propaganda, an article published in 1921. A farmer prefers to raise 1,000 thoroughbred horses than 1,000,000 runts. We must make this country into a garden of children instead of a back alley overrun with human weeds. In a speech in New York on February 29, 1924. The most merciful thing that a family does to one of its infant members is to kill it. In The Wickedness of Creating Large Families, a 1920 book. Birth control itself, often denounced as a violation of natural law, is nothing more or less than the facilitation of the process of weeding out the unfit, of preventing the birth of defectives or of those who will become defective. In The Goal, a 1920 text. Charity hides a stupid cruelty. Instead of decreasing and aiming to eliminate the stocks that are most detrimental to the future of the race and the world, it tends to render them to a threateningly dominant degree. In her book, The Cruelty of Charity. The most urgent problem today is how to limit and discourage the overfertility of the mentally and physically defective. In The Eugenic Value of Birth Control Propaganda, October 1921. The United States should keep the doors of immigration closed to the entrance of certain aliens whose condition is known to be detrimental to the stamina of the race, such as feeble-minded, idiots, imbeciles, insane, syphilitic, epileptic, criminal, professional prostitutes, and others of this class. In My Way to Peace, 1932. The Real Fascism. Democrats accuse Trump of being a fascist when, in reality, they are the fascists who sacrifice live children for their fanatical ritualistic ideas. More babies have died from abortion since it was legalized than all the deaths in the First and Second World Wars. During the Obama administration alone, 8 million abortions were carried out in the United States. 8 million human beings were executed and sacrificed by the satanic left, which advocates and legalizes this practice. On the other hand, we all know that fascism comes from the left, and Donald Trump is the prototype of a capitalist and conservative right-wing figure. Trump has only come to restore order, enforce the laws, and protect his citizens because that is the duty of every leader. Moreover, he is here to make America not just great again, but to make America America again, to regain its morality, its economy, its principles, and values, even with his impertinent character, his arrogant attitude, and his stubborn demeanor. Perhaps that is precisely why God chose him and not because he is liked by everyone in a world of appearances, falsehoods, and immorality. Although Trump was adored by all those liberals and progressives who now criticize and hate him just for running for the Conservative Party and entrusting himself to God, the Creator. I explain all of this in detail in my books, Why Donald Trump, and Understanding Donald Trump. Abortion advocates claim the right to take away another person's right to live when they should educate, take care of themselves, and prepare to be mothers, to have a home and start a family, as it should be. But these disorderly and degenerate creatures use freedom of expression to demand their right to take the lives of their children. They even become violent if contradicted. I remember a case that went viral on social media, where a young woman in the United States posted a video saying and showing documents that she had had 26 abortions up to that point. She was one of those degenerate or demonized abortion fanatics who believe that all babies deserve to die. Apparently, she had sex just to get pregnant and have an abortion. Many of these people, if they can be called people, suffer from a hypnotic state, chronic ignorance, addicted to the hatred that the media and corrupt politicians of the left impose on the population with their destructive, depraved, and antisocial manipulation. It can't even be said that they are paid to protest, create chaos in the streets, slander and insult through social media, organize to resist, but at the same time resist God, the Creator, and not just the laws, ethics, and morality. Many do things for pleasure because they feel hatred toward everything moral, natural, right, and legal. Order and laws are created so that there is no chaos, so that we evolve as rational beings, and so that we preserve our existence. Everything has an order in heaven and on earth, both spiritual, universal, physical, moral, social, and legal. But when emotion controls reason, people become irrational and lose control. A Brief History of Abortion. By Federico Cucso, March 2018. The concept of abortion has varied throughout history, as have attitudes towards this practice, from tolerance to prohibition. Even in the so-called Ebers Papyrus, written around 1500 BC, there are recipes for terminating pregnancy in ancient Egypt. One of them included the unripe fruit of the acacia tree, dates, and crushed onions with honey. Archaeological excavations have uncovered abortion instruments in China, Persia, and India. Until the early 3rd century, when a pre-Christian morality began to prevail, abortion in the Greco-Roman world was neither considered a crime nor a sin. In fact, as historian Julia Galeotti points out, it was a matter exclusively for women. Socrates considered it a maternal right, men had no say in these matters. Abortion was widely practiced in all social classes. It was morally accepted and not considered a crime. It is wrong to call copper in a molten state a statue and a fetus a man, wrote the Stoic philosopher Epictetus in the 2nd century. For philosophers like Aristotle, a fetus was not considered alive until 40 days after conception if it was male, and 80 days if it was female. In ancient Roman texts like Pliny the Elder's Natural History, there are references to plants with abortifacient properties, such as savory, known in ancient Greece, and a spice called silphium that grew in the colony of Cyrene, in what is now Libya. In other cases, surgical procedures were performed. As Greek historian Konstantinos Kaparis explains in his book, Abortion in the Ancient World, abortion was generally performed by a midwife and sometimes by the pregnant woman herself. But rarely by doctors. In the 1st century BC, the poet Ovid even compared the dangers and wounds of war for men with the dangers of abortion for women. For centuries, women were valued solely for their fertility, as a breeding ground. The Romans blamed women when a couple could not have children, and this was the most common reason for divorce. Their social function was to be mothers. Those who condemned abortion often did so to protect the property rights of the father, undermined by the woman's decision. If a woman was raped, notes English historian Jerry Toner in his book, The Ancient World, she carried the shame for life. One story tells of a young Roman woman who died after having an abortion. As her body was taken to the funeral, people shouted, "She got what she deserved." In the 2nd century, the Greek physician Cyrenus of Ephesus already spoke of therapeutic abortion in cases where pregnancy endangered the life of the mother. In such cases, the mother's life was privileged because the unborn child was not considered a fully formed being. Unacceptable. Over time, abortion came to be seen as an unacceptable expression of female autonomy. In the Hebrew world, where the desire to populate the earth to defend one's survival and the divine presence prevailed, fertility was considered a blessing from the Lord, and the shedding of semen and blood was abhorred. The oldest known Christian document condemning abortion is the Doctrine of the 12 Apostles, from around the year 100. Abortion was equated with sin and sexual immorality. In the 8th century, the Capitula Theodori, a penitential manual attributed to Theodore, Archbishop of Canterbury, imposed a penance of 1 year, 3 Lents, or 40 days, on women who abort before the fetus has a soul, provided it was done in good faith. Until the mid-18th century, what grew in the mother's womb was considered only an appendage of the mother's body, part of her viscera, and it was not animated, that is, the soul and body were not considered united, until the moment of birth. While it is still on the tree, the fruit is part of it, wrote theologian and jurist Francesco Emanuele Cangimola in 1745, just as the child in the womb is part of the mother. The historical fluctuations in perception of abortion resonate in the 20th century. Legislation criminalizing abortion became the emblem of the expropriation of female bodies and identities. United States and Europe. Before the mid-19th century, in the United States, drugs to induce abortions were advertised in newspapers and could be purchased in pharmacies. They could even be obtained through the mail, such as cotton root pills, known as female regulators. At that time, the fetus was not considered a person at all until a pregnant woman felt the first fetal movements, a phenomenon known as quickening. According to historian Leslie Reagan, laws against abortion were generalized in the second half of the 19th century more to prevent poisonings than for moral, political, or religious reasons. By 1900, abortion was illegal, except in cases where the mother's life was in danger. Even so, women continued to have abortions, behind closed doors or in private homes. It is estimated that in the 1950s and 1960s, illegal abortions ranged from 200,000 to 1.2 million per year. Inspired by the civil rights movements, massive mobilizations for the liberalization of abortion took place in 1965 in the United States. Abortions were finally legalized in a historic and controversial Supreme Court ruling in 1973, known as the Roe v. Wade case. States have enacted more than 1074 laws to restrict access to the procedure, according to the Guttmacher Institute, an organization for sexual and reproductive rights. The issue reached such levels of violence that abortion clinics have bulletproof glass, and doctors are provided with bulletproof vests for fear of armed attacks by pro-life extremists. In England, there is a before and after the Abortion Act of 1967, although in 1920 English law did not consider it a crime if it was done in good faith for the sole purpose of preserving the life of the mother. For West Germany and France, the crucial year was 1971. Wir haben abgetrieben. We have aborted, was the headline on the cover of the German magazine Stern on June 6 of that year. In the article, 374 women confessed publicly. In 1976, West Germany legalized abortion up to 12 weeks of pregnancy for medical reasons, sexual offenses, or serious social or emotional problems. Abortions are now covered by public health insurance. It is estimated that 6 abortions are performed for every 1,000 women aged 15 to 44. In France, writer Simone de Beauvoir wrote the Manifesto of the 343 Sluts, Manifeste de 343 Salopes, published in Le Nouvel Observateur on April 5, 1971. In it, she said, in France, every year, 1 million women have abortions in dangerous conditions due to the secrecy to which they are condemned. This operation, performed in a hospital environment, does not present significant risks. The fate of these millions of women is silenced. Consequently, I declare that I am one of them. I declare that I have had an abortion. 4 years later, on January 17, 1975, the Prevail Law was finally passed, authorizing free and gratuitous abortions up to 10 weeks of pregnancy. Abortion is a human sacrifice to Moloch. Whim or Abortion as Human Sacrifice. By P.O. Moa. It seems that in primitive religions, human sacrifices were common. Among the Phoenicians, Canaanites, and Carthaginians, the god Moloch Baal was appeased with the sacrifice of newborn or not-so-newborn children, who were to be thrown into the fire amidst a great noise of tambourines and trumpets to drown out the cries of the victims. It's hard to conceive a more nightmarish spectacle. The underlying psychological mechanism is likely the awareness of the unpredictable human destiny, Humans must struggle and strive to survive or live well, with no guarantee of success, no matter how much energy and intelligence they apply to the task. They know, deep down, that their fate is only partially determined by their will and insight, that success may be the prelude to failure, and that death awaits them in the end. Therefore, there are other forces, other spirits, much more powerful, capable of turning even the most rationally conceived enterprises into disasters. It is necessary, therefore, to gain the favor of these forces, of these gods, by offering them something highly valuable. A firstborn child, for example. An ancient explanation claimed that Moloch represented fire, a symbol of light, of spiritual purity, to which human beings, also spirits but diminished or obscured by their material component, by the fall into matter, had to offer such sacrifices to redeem themselves. This is a classic theme developed by Gnosticism, leading to an ideal of societal suicide, as seen among the Cathars or, in other words, as proposed today by some intellectuals. I believe there is an interesting resemblance between sacrifices to Moloch and the current spread of abortion. Here, too, we find the sacrifice of human lives amidst a deafening noise of sophisms and clamor. The best argument against abortion is the photographs and videos that expose its reality, but abortion advocates react by turning away and exclaiming, "How disgusting, how tasteless," rather than, "What a crime." It is worth contrasting the arguments for and against. The anti-abortion argument focuses on the fact of human life, which should be evident to any impartial observer. The abortion feminist argument revolves around a woman's right to her own body. The fallacy of the latter is obvious: it is not her own body but another body, a new and distinct life. The argument refers to another so-called right, that of equality. The man impregnates but does not conceive, which seems to feminism, whether openly acknowledged or not, a particularly unfair inequality. Even more unjust when, in the feminist hedonistic idea of life, sexuality is merely a way to have fun, but this good time can end in pregnancy for the woman, while the man remains unburdened. The same obsession with equality leads feminism, as Doris Lessing pointed out, to aversion to children, who would enslave women. Homosexuality is closely related to this way of thinking. Homosexual relationships avoid the undesirable consequence of pregnancy, the commitment that raising children entails, and allow for a life with fewer burdens, seemingly more free and enjoyable, more playful, as it was recently put. However, homosexuality cannot become the norm, as some claim, because it would lead to the extinction of the human species, something that some desire and preach, by the way. Same-sex marriage is heading in that direction. Of course, the instinct for reproduction persists, with varying degrees of strength, and even some same-sex couples demand their right to adopt children, depriving them of their most basic right to be raised by a father and a mother. It is a chain of deliberate confusion born from the supposed right to one's own body and the conception of natural inequality as an injustice that society must rectify. It bears some resemblance to the fall into matter, redeemable through the sacrifice of human lives. Here, of course, there doesn't seem to be any deity receiving such sacrifices. But I believe there is one, the goddess Convenience and her offspring, the little god Whim. Another sophism of abortion can be observed. What if, they argue, there was a rape? Or if the fetus has such deformities that it would prevent a minimally normal life? Or if the mother's life is in danger due to the pregnancy? But do these reasons account for abortions? Only an insignificant portion of them. The vast majority of these sacrifices are offered for the supposed convenience, taken to the extreme whim, of the mother or father, who are reluctant to take on the responsibility of raising a child. They are even more reluctant because, in the prevailing feminist hedonistic climate, the mother is very uncertain whether her relationship with the father will last long. People want to have fun, and in such circumstances, child-rearing does not seem very enjoyable. The right to one's own body, to freedom without responsibility, to the morality dictated by the god Whim, so adored today by politicians as well as commercial advertising, demands its own victims. It is no coincidence that feminism, homosexuality, and abortion go hand in hand. They define the new ideology of the European Union quite well. That socialist ideology, with its own gods, has been replaced or evolved into this one. In short, it's a very broad topic, the great moral question of our time, one that often receives too little time and too many clichés. The god of the Gnostics. The Phoenicians and Canaanites believed that Moloch, as a result of a catastrophe that occurred at the beginning of time, had transformed himself into darkness by becoming matter. According to Phoenician beliefs, in accordance with Gnostic heresy, man was the incarnation of this ontogenetic tragedy, and to redeem himself from this sin, it was necessary to offer sacrifices to Moloch by immolating babies, as they were considered the most impregnated with matter. It is worth noting that the Gnostics are an apology for the agnostics of today, who are the majority of liberals and progressives. Throwing newborns into the fire constituted the most pleasing sacrifice that could be offered to this relentless divinity, represented by a gigantic bronze statue that enclosed a furnace in its cavernous body. Mothers would throw their own living children into Moloch's incandescent womb, which, waiting for them with open arms, would devour its poor and small victims through the fire. And to mitigate the revulsion caused among those who witnessed such scenes, the wicked priests of Moloch took care to sound trumpets and beat drums to drown out the infernal melody of the cries of the innocent. So, without remorse or mercy, in those times, the Phoenicians immolated thousands of infants. Only in those times. Only the Phoenicians. Abortion, indeed, was a widespread custom in the pagan world. It was precisely one of the great and magnificent victories obtained by our Lord Jesus Christ on the cross in redeeming humanity, the virtual disappearance of this monstrosity in Christian nations under the beneficial influence of the Church. Many centuries of decadence were necessary for men to dare to deify the criminal practice of abortion again, by decriminalizing or authorizing it for various reasons. For the first time, in 1920, abortion was legalized in the Soviet Union under Marxist socialism, during Lenin's dictatorship. In the 1940s and 1950s, Japan, Canada, Sweden, and several Eastern European countries dominated by communists followed suit. And in the 1960s and 1970s, during the sexual revolution, both in the United States and in most Western European countries, doors were opened to legal abortion or at least its decriminalization. Thus, on the threshold of the 21st century, when so much is proclaimed about human rights, the role of the Phoenician priests is now occupied by unscrupulous doctors. But an even greater tragedy, for which human language has difficulty finding the exact words to describe, is that Moloch's womb has been replaced by the mother's own womb. Who would have thought that, in our fateful days, the most dangerous place for a child's life is in their mother's womb, the most naturally sheltered and welcoming place? Could there be a greater and more monstrous inversion of values? The womb has become a tomb. To which divinity are the millions of innocent victims sacrificed today? They vary according to a macabre polytheism. When it comes to worshipping sexual pleasure, disregarding the purposes and consequences established by nature itself, that God is called Eros, and the religion takes the name of eroticism. When it comes to avoiding hindrances, in a frantic pursuit of personal convenience, that idol is called ego, and the religion is named egocentrism. Above all, this stands the Leviathan, that is, hypocritical states and international organizations that are complicit in a glaring injustice, the extermination of the most defenseless beings, the unborn. And they drown in the blood of innocent victims the most basic of human rights, the right to life, practicing the most odious discrimination against human beings in the prenatal phase of their existence. In reality, modern Moloch is much more relentless than the Canaanite god. The human sacrifices of antiquity are insignificant compared to the 50 million children who are sacrificed in the womb of their mothers every year. The paradox could not be more glaring. The child should expect, precisely from the mother, limitless love, but she sacrifices it, not on a flaming altar, but on a cold operating table. The doctor, whose mission is to guarantee life, becomes the instrument of its death. The state, which should punish those who raise a hand against life, denies the unborn the right to live. This tragic symbol of the moral decay of society also reveals its deep dehumanization and irrationality. Dehumanization because it considers human life as something trivial, ethereal, a vain breeze without a specific purpose or transcendent destiny. Irrationality because it leads to the slaughter of innocent life. Abortion deeply contradicts human nature. It is a fundamental disorder that takes us away from the most basic moral principle, which commands us to respect the lives of our fellow human beings. Good and evil, justice and injustice, are not mere conventions or whims. We must adjust our personal conduct to them for the fulfillment of our duties. Now, rights and justice will only find solid and effective justification if firmly grounded in their ultimate and most absolute foundations, that is, if it is understood that the inalienable rights of man come from his being created in the image and likeness of God, and that, as a creature, he has a duty to give to others what is due to them. On the contrary, we must be willing not to palliate the strong truths or conceal the good doctrine, being prepared to face the consequences of it gladly. If by doing so, we could prevent the life of a child from being eliminated within its mother's womb, murdered by a conscienceless specialist, before being born, we would consider ourselves richly rewarded, without caring about the hatred provoked by exposing with clear words the laws of God and the teachings of the Church. Moloch, God of Abortions, Murderer of Innocents. By Laureano Benitez Grande Caballero. December 2017. At the dawn of a sinister sunrise in the year 5 B.C., a detachment of Herodian guards entered the small village of Bethlehem, where they carried out an infanticidal pogrom that ended the lives of 12 children under the age of 2. At the dawn of any sinister sunrise in our current world, an army of globalist soldiers, dressed in white, armed with scalpels, forceps, and an array of surgical instruments, storms with bloodshot eyes into many of our cities, under orders to eliminate millions of unborn children. They are today's Mengels, perfectly legal, officials of the abortion Armageddon, executioners of the fetal Holocaust, henchmen of the New World Order, expert butchers trained in the art of hunting defenseless fetuses amidst an absolutely gruesome gore show, where tender bodies are beheaded, massacred, tortured, all in the name of the human rights of their mothers, their reproductive rights, the right to choose. Strange democratic rights are, deciding who lives and who dies, strange rights that grant impunity for the free power to kill when the first human right is the right to life, suspicious rights that allow this unspeakable massacre of innocents, resulting in 56 million victims each year. So, what will the Herodians attacking this dawn, December 28, the day of the Holy Innocents, reap? 84 abortions per minute. They are mercenaries, integrated into the fateful IV army, voluntary interruption of pregnancy, a euphemistic name that governments and transnational organizations use to conceal the sinister aura surrounding the word abortion. They are simple bureaucrats of death, all funded by our taxes, even if we have conscientious objections to these mass murders. And they call this democracy. Furthermore, they are paid executioners of governments in countries where birth rates are alarmingly declining, to the point where most European countries are currently losing population. These criminal governments, instead of promoting pronatal policies, allocate significant funds to this butchery, to the extent that the Spanish Family Planning Federation, a subsidiary of the American abortion multinational, Planned Parenthood, received €360,000 in public funds last year, despite currently losing its status as public utility, due to irregularities in its financing. Meanwhile, Planned Parenthood performs an average of 897 abortions daily, and, before the Trump era, received subsidies totaling $554 million, with its profits reaching a total of $1,354 billion last year. This slaughter is being planned and directed by international organizations, shamelessly serving the interests of the globalist oligarchy, which obsessively seeks to reduce the world population to approximately 500 million people, as this number is more manageable for their despotic interests and wealth accumulation than the current 7 billion. Is this also the aim of the ominous global campaign to impose, using all its enormous media power, LGBT laws? Because homosexualizing the population is also a strategy to reduce it. Midterm abortions. These organizations act as disciplined executioners, faithful enforcers of the imperialist ideology prevailing in the New World Order, which they ruthlessly impose on countries, many of which have no defense due to their underdeveloped conditions. Among these organizations, UNFPA, United Nations Fund for Population Activities, a UN agency responsible for promoting demographic control, stands out, receiving a significant portion of its funding from the USA. Every year, UNFPA distributes more than $20 billion to promote demographic control plans, primarily focused on sterilization. In Kenya, for example, access to free national health services can only be obtained by showing a document confirming acceptance of family planning programs. In Brazil, according to the Secretary of the Center for Bioethics at Gemelli Hospital, many women have been sterilized without their consent at the moment of childbirth, while in the state of Paraíba, mass sterilization of women between 15 and 40 years of age has been carried out. In the case of Spain, the Herodian governments executed nearly 100,000 fetuses each year, a phenomenon that constitutes the leading cause of mortality in our country. Suspiciously, this does not appear in the annual population movement statistics. The abortions that occur in Spain in 4 days, 1192 abortions, exceed the annual death toll from traffic accidents, 134 deaths in 2013, or nearly half of the annual suicides, 3,539 in 2012. The majority, 93%, is by choice, invoking the freedom to abort granted by our current law. These revealing statistics indicate that while the abortion rate among Spanish women is around 6 per 1,000, among immigrants, it reaches levels close to 30 per 1,000, with 68% coming from South America. Facing this ominous right to choose advocated by abortionism, Hannah Holland Matlery, a professor of international politics at the University of Oslo, has made harsh accusations against governments that systematically legislate against families. We live in strange times when a natural institution like motherhood has lost its rights. To better understand these allegations, the Norwegian professor established a list of the natural rights of motherhood that are systematically violated by the system: the right to a family wage that can sustain the family, the right to have the number of children desired by the parents, the mother's right to choose between work or home, or to reconcile motherhood and work without feeling discriminated, the right to educate children in matters of spiritual values, sexual life, and morality, etc. In addition to criminally seeking a reduction in the world population, the primary objective of abortion policies is to destroy the family, the primary unit of society, which is also decisively aided by the despotism of the LGBT lobby. The ultimate goal of the totalitarian New World Order, to put it in the words of Javier de Jesus y Azpilicueta, is to achieve an inclusive state where the social body moves towards a community of members directly incorporated into the state, without family influences, with their education and values shaped by power and the media, shaping their life projects. The family is an inconvenient obstacle, a social structure inconvenient to certain financial forces, communication monopolies, and ambitious politicians for their plans to standardize values, beliefs, votes, lifestyle, and consumption. The family produces free citizens because the family is human and emotional security, formative education, bodily and moral health, freedom, and autonomy against the Leviathan state. A state that, in the New World Order, is ceasing to be an administrative structure serving citizens and guaranteeing their rights to become a tool of oppression for citizens from whom they intend to strip the intrinsic dignity they possess by nature and the values that ennoble them. Mengels, butchers, and feminine priestesses, Salomes who, with bare breasts, demand the heads of the unborn, shouting insistently that abortion is sacred. Because there is another hidden objective in this horrifying slaughter, in this gruesome butchery that turns every day into a macabre massacre of innocents. The death of infants and the unborn has always had, throughout history, a strong component of sacrifice to some deity, a sanguinary homage to some god or goddess whose favors are sought, or whose voracity is appeased. To which god are aborted fetuses offered as a ritual sacrifice? To a figure known as Moloch, a god of Canaanite origin who was worshipped by the Phoenicians, Carthaginians, and Syrians. He is also identified in classical mythology with Cronus and Saturn, the god who devours his children, the planet ruled by Satan. He is generally depicted as a human figure with the head of a ram or calf, seated on a throne bearing symbols of royalty. Any resemblance to the Lord of the Flies, as you can see, is not purely coincidental. Moloch's preferred sacrifices were children, especially babies, as they were considered the most impure beings. Temples dedicated to Moloch housed enormous bronze statues of the god. These statues were hollow, with Moloch's figure having an open mouth and outstretched arms, palms facing up, ready to receive the burnt offering. A fire was lit inside the statue, continuously fed during the sacrifice. Sometimes, the arms were articulated so that the children who served as sacrifices were placed in the hands of the statue, which, with the help of chains, would lift the victim into the god's glowing belly. Before filling the statue, the area was filled with the loud noise of flutes and drums so that the screams and cries of the victims were drowned out and not heard by the crowd. In the Middle Ages, Moloch transformed into a demon who took pleasure in causing mothers to weep as he stole their children. This is not surprising, considering that a fundamental aspect of satanic rituals has always been the sacrifice of children. Allen Ginsberg frequently invokes the Luciferian name of Moloch in his poem, Howl, one of the most important works of the Beat generation. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving hysterical naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix, angel-headed hipsters burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of night. These verses describe the massacre of the innocent. And these beautiful words from Mother Teresa of Calcutta condemn abortion. The greatest destroyer of peace today is abortion because it is a war against the child, a direct killing of the innocent child, murder by the mother herself. If we accept that a mother can kill her own child, how can we tell other people not to kill one another? The child is a gift of God to the family. Each child is created in the special image and likeness of God for greater things, to love and to be loved. But what does God say? He says, even if a mother could forget her child, I will not forget you. I have carved you in the palm of my hand. We are carved in the palm of his hand. That unborn child has been carved in the hand of God from the conception and is called by God to love and to be loved, not only now in this life but forever. God can never forget us. Moloch in the Bib. Leviticus 18:21. You shall not give any of your offspring to offer them to Moloch, nor shall you profane the name of your God, I am the Lord. Leviticus 20:2-5. You shall also say to the people of Israel, any one of the people of Israel or of the strangers who sojourn in Israel who gives any of his children to Moloch shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I myself will set my face against that man and will cut him off from among his people, because he has given one of his children to Moloch, to make my sanctuary unclean and to profane my holy name. And if the people of the land do at all close their eyes to that man when he gives one of his children to Moloch, and do not put him to death, then I will set my face against that man and against his clan and will cut them off from among their people, him and all who follow him in whoring after Moloch. 1 Kings 11:7. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh the abomination of Moab, and for Moloch the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. 1 Kings 11:33. Because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtoreth the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh the god of Moab, and Milcom the god of the Ammonites, and they have not walked in my ways, doing what is right in my sight and keeping my statutes and my rules, as David his father did. 2 Kings 23:10. And he defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, that no one might burn his son or his daughter as an offering to Moloch. Jeremiah 32:35. They built the high places of Baal in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to offer up their sons and daughters to Molech, though I did not command them, nor did it enter my mind, that they should do this abomination, to cause Judah to sin. Amos 5:26. You shall take up Sikkoth your king, and Kiyun your star god, your images that you made for yourselves. Acts 7:43. You took up the tent of Moloch and the star of your god Rephan, the images that you made to worship, and I will send you into exile beyond Babylon. Open borders, multiculturalism, diversity, LGBT movement, feminism, socialism. The New Left today claims all these things as part of cultural Marxism. But what does all this have to do with the population reduction plan? Well, the globalist elite seeks the destruction of the West with its morals and customs, to root out conservatism and Christian principles, which give more independence to the individual. Classical capitalism provides spiritual, human, and economic freedom to its citizens, allowing for free expression and religion, personal fulfillment without depending on the government, and individual prosperity, things that do not fit or align with the new world order they want to implant, a plan they have been devising for centuries. That is why new strategies, ideologies, and social revolutions were created and funded, to create chaos, opposition, and division. As I mentioned earlier, many world wars, civil wars, coups, and election frauds have been financed and organized by this globalist elite, as well as communism as an antithesis to capitalism and fascism as the experimental or failed synthesis that would bring about a new world government through war, military expansion, and political control. However, in that war, World War II, Russian socialism and capitalism in Eastern Europe and the United States prevailed, even though the U.S. was not invaded by the Nazis on its own soil, but it was an important ally in ending that globalist expansionist war by fascism. To bring about social transformation and create a more dependent, manipulable, and submissive global population, social chaos, political division, and moral, religious, and cultural distortion are necessary. Therefore, all these pro-open borders, multiculturalist, diversity, transformative, feminist, socialist, and Islamist groups have been created and funded. Anything that can provoke a moral, cultural, religious, and social change, because, as Hillary Clinton's campaign slogan said, "Stronger Together," which, by the way, is a fascist slogan used by the fascists in Italy in the early 20th century, things I explain in my book, Fascism in America. The more people advocate, demand, defend, and proclaim these social ideas, these changes to transform customs and laws, with the purpose of making constitutional changes that represent the interests of that globalist ideology and the New World Order, the more secure they will be of victory. That is why it is necessary and essential to poison the population with lies, slander, and rejection of existing laws, authorities, and politicians who do not conform to that system, what is holy, pure, sacred, the true God and His Word. Uncontrolled immigration is a new weapon used by these leftists and globalists, resulting in demographic changes and social distortion, increased crime, higher taxes, new control laws, etc. This is a strategy to reduce the population, because the law and order that has existed in the United States for over 2 centuries have provided financial security, economic power, the ability to protect our borders and territory, and offers citizens the opportunity to prosper freely, which, consequently, allows couples to have more children, create blessed homes, and have families. In addition to allowing the entry of more poor people, mostly mediocre, into the country, they would gain more voters, more people dependent on the state, manipulable and submissive. Anyone who immigrates irregularly and does not enter any country through established control points is not doing so to contribute to that country, but to collect, evade taxes, and live irregularly, without order, without control, so they will try to cheat and commit fraud to survive, work, or get ahead. As I explain in my book, The Immigrant Invasion and Demographic Change, there is a big difference between an immigrant and an illegal immigrant. People who enter a country irregularly or illegally are no longer immigrants but criminals because they commit a crime. That is why there are honest immigrants and demeaning immigrants because, on top of entering illegally and even cheating to work, committing fraud and identity theft, or stealing someone else's identity, they still have the audacity to protest, demand, try to depend on the government, or claim compensation. Many want to enter as refugees when they come from democratic countries where there is freedom of speech and religion, and human rights are respected, when in reality they just want to go to a developed country because they cannot find work in their own countries. Some do not even seek work but live a disorderly life that brings them no benefit, but they believe or hope that in the United States, for example, they will be given and supported. Many bring children, exposing them to danger and excessive exhaustion on a long journey to the border. Some pay to be smuggled across the border but are not capable of investing to improve their place of origin, they just want to reunite with their family on the other side. Many are not even capable of waiting for the family reunification process that their relatives have arranged for them to enter legally with all the documents and benefits of any resident, simply because they are accustomed to disorder and living outside the law. Then, when they enter, if they manage to enter, they join street protests, vandalism, destruction, and crimes. The equation is simple: those who do something illegal or outside the law are capable and will therefore do more illegal things. But with this humanitarian awakening, this strategy of pity and justice for all, they manipulate and urge the masses to commit these crimes and many more. In short, chaos is necessary for change. The imposition of multiculturalism on a global level is a much more sinister plan than we imagine. It is the path to a global or world government. It is not just about the idea of sharing the planet among all, because it is not about having multicultural neighborhoods like Chinatown, Little Russia, etc., in large cities in a multicultural country like the United States. The real intention is the loss of national identity, customs, traditions, one's own culture, and patriotism. We came to the United States to integrate ourselves into its laws, principles, values, culture, customs, traditions, and idiosyncrasy, not to change it, deform it, impose ourselves, or contaminate it. With the demagoguery that we must be politically correct, multiculturalism has become another weapon as a political strategy to implement changes and bring about social transformation. Among multiculturalism, diversity, gender equality, and mass homosexuality, they would achieve better control of the global population, as this is already taking place on an international scale. It is not just a crazy idea of first world countries where democracy and freedom of expression give people the right to choose how to live their lives. Now they subject smaller countries, those dependent on large economies, to accept and implement these cultural distortions. The New Left, with its modern socialism at the globalist level, is trying to impose its cultural Marxism to socialize, centralize, education, health, the economy, and all public services. They only want control because the intention is to create a global economic, political, and religious empire. Regarding homosexuality, gender ideology, and the LGBT movement, which is already planning to add new letters for new reasons, in other words, new depravities, it is simply a strategy to create more sociopaths and other diseases that reduce the lives of those who engage in these sins, not only sexually transmitted diseases but also psychological and mental traumas, in order to clearly achieve a more vulnerable and manipulable population. Homosexualizing the population from a young age or even childhood to reduce the population makes logical sense. They want to do it at all costs because we cannot migrate to another planet. Consequently, this would significantly reduce the global population. I want to explain some concepts so that you better understand what I am saying, although you can find all of this in more detail in my book, Globalism and the New World Order. Globalism. The term globalism refers to a world government formed by supranational organizations, meaning they are above the administration of each country. For the critical view of this phenomenon, this domination was planned and is being executed as we speak, by the global banking elite, the same people who own all the multinational corporations. It is the bankers and their wealthy friends like George Soros, Bill Gates, Oprah Winfrey, Michael Bloomberg, and others who finance progressive projects aligned with cultural Marxism. Globalism is an organized scheme, a project for global domination disguised as multiculturalism. The concept of globalism differs from globalization. The latter is related to economics, although globalization is the vehicle through which globalists aim to take over national governments. Globalization is sold as a voluntary and spontaneous order, but in reality, it is a series of coordinated actions by supranational organizations and multinational corporations working with complicit political allies in national governments to achieve the end of national sovereignty through trade agreements, the elimination of borders, and the acceptance of mass migration into developed and developing countries. Gender ideology. A series of pseudoscientific gender studies that began in the 1960s and 1970s in the United States and Europe theorized that there was a difference between biological sex and gender. For this academic school, being a man or a woman depends not only on genitals or chromosomes but on cultural and behavioral patterns. These standards, according to theorists in the field, are acquired in society. Conservative scholars, however, believe that the findings of gender studies have not received validation from exact and biological sciences. Therefore, for them, the current of gender studies cannot even be called a theory because it lacks scientific rigor. Thus, we speak of gender ideology as a set of ideas that argue that each person should define themselves as a man or a woman. This is one of the least scientific claims made in a long time. This kind of belief accepts that people can define themselves not only as men or women but also as rabbits, people of different ethnicities, and so on. In the words of some conservative politicians, gender ideology is promoted by a group of thinkers who have concluded that a child is born neutral, grows neutral, and then decides what they want to be. That is simply pseudoscience, lacking all reason and evidence. In other words, gender ideology is madness, as clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson explains. Cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism is the revolutionary movement that seeks to transform society while dismantling capitalist, Western values. But what does Marxism mean? Marxism supports the idea that the working class should take control of the means of production in a given country. Thus, workers would take control of the state and start a classless society. While classical Marxism, Karl Marx's thought mainly refers to economics, post-World War II currents have come to champion cultural Marxism, which is tearing society apart to install a new type of culture. Politically correct discourse. Politically correct discourse is a manipulative tool to centralize power. Charlton Heston once said that politically correct discourse is tyranny with manners, and he was right. Mass ignorance is key to achieving the type of society we live in and the kind of environment the elite has planned for all of us. It argues that fear, a very human feeling of rejection, is one of the pillars of current actions aimed at dividing social groups that would otherwise have strong bonds. The manipulation of language through the imposition of a semantic fog has become a powerful tool to turn individuals into self-censoring, senseless, and easily controllable beings. The effective capture of society is carried out through the most influential media, Hollywood, pop culture, academia, religion, and more recently, the family. The agenda with the intention of centralizing power and control is presented to society disguised, hidden behind messages of equity, equality, feminism, and the idea of destroying the so-called patriarchal society. Anyone who dares to express their opinion against the brainwashing movement is immediately accused of promoting homophobic speech, racism, anti-Semitism, being a misogynist, a Holocaust denier, and so on. Politically correct language is language that has been sanitized. Phrases, words, and expressions that were once common in society can no longer be used in a political and organized context. According to current political correctness crises, censorship and public disapproval of such expressions tend to destroy the values of Western society, such as nationhood, family, and religiosity. Here is the plan presented by a former CIA official. Socialism. Socialism is the set of doctrines and political movements that aim only at the interests of workers in a society where there is no private ownership of the means of production. In socialism, the state, not the market, defines the direction of the economy through plans elaborated by the government itself. The state controls the means of production and acts as an intermediary process to lead to a classless society. Examples of modern socialism include Venezuela, Cuba, and until 2018, Brazil. During his inauguration, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro said that the Brazilian people began to free themselves from socialism. He also mentioned the end of state gigantism, a term related to the idea of socialism as extensive state control in the economic sphere. Ideological bias. Bias means distortion or tortuosity in the way of observing, judging, or acting. Ideology means a set of ideas, convictions, and philosophical, social, and political principles that characterize the thinking of an individual, group, movement, era, or society. By not applying any ideological bias in government or politics, it is understood that such a government will carry out its functions without the influence of any ideology. Instead, it will work for the betterment of the country without adhering to a conservative or liberal bias. This is the kind of work that Donald Trump has been doing since taking office in 2016, and this is exactly what globalists don't like about him. It explains why global media outlets criticize Trump daily. In reality, the media has become a mafia, seeking to establish a collectivist mindset contaminated by radical ideological prejudices. On the international stage, for example, fighting against ideological bias would mean prioritizing bilateral or trilateral agreements with other countries instead of seeking approval from international organizations like the UN, WTO, WHO, NATO, and others. In summary, the political and ideological battle being waged today in the Western world is for the preservation of independent nation-states against global governance led by supranational organizations. The battle is for or against a project of global domination, for or against unscientific gender ideology, for or against cultural Marxism and politically correct discourse, for or against socialism, for or against ideological bias. The question is, will Western society understand what is at stake in this battle? Will its members have the courage to fight for nationalism, science, reason, politically incorrect discourse, true capitalism, and impartial news and information? Multiculturalism as a way of chaos. I have decided to address these topics separately in different chapters to provide better information and not rely solely on ideas or assumptions. Multiculturalism is the egalitarian ideology that promotes the coexistence of different groups, ethnic, cultural, racial, or religious, within the same social framework, a country, or a state. It can also be defined as the ideology in political practice that aims to bring together various ethnicities. Ethnicity equals a race with its own culture, referred to as cultures, by this ideology, with explicit recognition of the cultural, ethnic, reality in that state, especially the cultural reality of non-white ethnicities. Therefore, the word multiculturalism can be defined and conceptualized as a euphemism for multiracialism. As can be seen at a terminological level, this ideology reluctantly acknowledges the reality of ethnicity, preferring the more politically correct term culture. The multi-ethnic articulation takes place by politically affirming and legally sanctioning the distinct manifestations of each ethnicity within the multicultural society. Failing assimilation, it represents a second conciliatory attempt between the immigration demands of internationalist capital and the need for some form of social order. The purpose of multiculturalism is to unify all cultures, races, and religions under the utopian slogans that all are equal and capable of living in harmony within a state. This doctrine is an essential part of the globalization process, the consequence of which is a unified international government or world government. Multiculturalism was introduced without the consent of the societies that suffer from it, therefore, according to this critique, it is undemocratic. Reports reveal that people prefer to live in racially or ethnically homogeneous communities, where they can identify with their peers. This phenomenon is often labeled as racist, but it has had visible consequences, such as the so-called white flight, where the white population massively leaves neighborhoods invaded by people of other races or immigrants. Since the foundation of multiculturalism is cultural heterogeneity and the fragmentation of different groups with different interests, its direct consequence is the loss of stability, cohesion, and unity of a society, as well as its decline, descending to the level of third world status. United Nations studies reveal that 80% of all civil wars and other violent conflicts have their origins in ethnic conflicts. As an example, Kosovo, originally a Serbian region with Serbian citizens, has been transformed into a region dominated by a minority due to successive migrations, eventually leading to its independence by the invaders, although it remains unrecognized by several states. Another well-known example is the current Ukrainian civil war, made possible by the fact that after Stalin's deportations and purges, the entire eastern part of the country was repopulated by ethnic Russians who never assimilated into the national identity, culture, and language of Ukraine. Contrary to what politically correct slogans advocate, ethnic diversity did not make these countries stronger. Instead, it made them targets for secessionism and foreign intervention, resulting in the loss of vast areas of their territory. This scenario could be the likely future evolution of all multicultural and multiracial countries. Furthermore, the significant increase in immigrants, along with a liberal democracy system, causes locals and natives to lose control of their countries, national press, economy, government. In other words, all significant sectors of the nation will be under the control of a foreign minority, as seen in the United States, where the government, media, and other sectors are controlled by agents loyal only to Israel, which they consider their true homeland. Miscegenation as a direct consequence of multiculturalism destroys the identity, unique expression, and singularity of a people. In the words of David Lane, societies that allow a group of a foreign race to live with them disappear because the inevitable result of racial integration is racial crossbreeding, which destroys the originality and exclusivity of the race. It is not constructive to hate other races or mixed-race individuals, but ethnic separation is a requirement for the preservation of one's race. David Lane. In a multicultural society, there is an inherent incompatibility between different worldviews. Society is a complex system with its own identity, values, culture, tradition, etc. In that sense, civilizations like Europeans and Muslims are mutually incompatible. The government and legal system of society cannot encompass and represent all conflicting values. Therefore, the coexistence of different cultures means they cannot exercise their rights simultaneously in the same place. Multiculturalism has been defended based on the supposed cultural enrichment, which argues that in a culturally heterogeneous society, there would be mutual spiritual enrichment, resulting in a society acquiring the best elements from each culture. However, in practice, it is challenging to find an example of how a third world immigrant has culturally enriched European culture and civilization. Furthermore, racially homogeneous societies are free to adopt the positive elements of other cultures, avoiding all the drawbacks of multiculturalism. False solution to racism and ethnic conflicts. In multicultural societies, conflicts arising as a direct and inherent consequence of multicultural integration are supposed to be minimized through so-called intercultural education and through restrictive anti-discrimination legislation. Some believe that multiculturalism is a measure aimed at ending racism, but by integrating races and cultures that are so different, both physically and spiritually, it is exacerbating the problem. In general terms, what is now understood as racism is the result of the interaction between two or more races within a common space, so racism, racial discrimination, or ethnic conflicts could be effectively eliminated if each human group inhabited its own living space, fostering its development without the need for utopian, progressive ideals of racial integration. It has been shown, through statistical and psychological studies, that aggression, criminal tendencies, and delinquency vary among urban populations of different races. A multiracial or multicultural society is unjust because it places less aggressive human groups in the crosshairs of violence. Moreover, multiculturalism leads to the end of multiculturalism itself since, in the long run, it tends to generate a single way of thinking, a single culture, and a single race, with no diversity of any kind. Issues arising. Racial heterogenization in a state brings a series of problems for the nation concerning society, identity, and its economy, such as ethnic conflicts, xenophobia and negative racism, xenomania and endophobia, social divisions, unemployment and economic crises, miscegenation, decreased quality of life, loss or disappearance of a nation's identity. Ideological source of multiculturalism. There are three types of pro-multiculturalists. A. Those who know perfectly well what they are doing. The owners of big capital. Bankers, board members of publicly traded conglomerates, major entrepreneurs, media magnates, and leaders of NGOs. B. Useful idiots who believe the lies of the first group. A significant portion of the European population, although decreasing. C. Those who harbor a strange and visceral hatred, endophobia, for the white race and Western civilization, very similar to the Oedipus complex. This hatred leads them to identify themselves as the scum of their own people with what they unconsciously consider the scum of humanity, xenophilia. The root of this self-hatred can be found in the slave morality masterfully portrayed by Friedrich Nietzsche in On the Genealogy of Morality and The Antichrist. Theodore Kaczynski, on the other hand, dissected the psychology of the leftist in his manifesto Industrial Society and Its Future, and Lenin mentioned the infantile disorder of leftism. Culturally and mediatically, multiculturalism is preached by remnants of the May 1968 movement, which are steeped in decadent cosmopolitanism. These relics of the extreme left gave the green light to the multicultural experiment from their high positions in the world of politics and culture, in full harmony with the major capitalist empires, which were the true masterminds behind this socio-ethnic engineering operation. Preaching integration, alliance of civilizations, solidarity, coexistence, no human being is illegal, open doors, a world without borders, I am a citizen of the world, they come to pay our pensions, and they come to do the jobs we don't want, from their sofas, villas, offices, and privileged neighborhoods. These decadent bourgeoisie, these millionaires, are the ones who created the dictatorship of political correctness, pretending to give lessons in rectitude to ordinary citizens and set themselves up as moralizers of the rest of humanity. The dogma of political correctness, the modern equivalent of the old anti-heresy, accuses anyone who questions the desirability of third-world immigration to Europe of being xenophobic and racist, heretical. This is killing the continent. The endogamous elites of the West are creating a Europe without Europeans, and slowly but surely, the victims are realizing this. Someday, someone will have to stand up to the white-collar thieves who have ruined European nations and turned them into colonies of the Third World. Never before has an entire civilization embraced its own suicide with such enthusiasm. In Spain, this multicultural initiative has been spearheaded by the Africanized sectors of society, and the real working-class Spanish people were never democratically consulted or gave their consent for mafias, robberies, rapes, or ethnic gangs to infest their neighborhoods. It is also clear that, decades later, none of the apostles of multicultural society has experienced the effects of multiculturalism firsthand, as they live in bubble neighborhoods and are disconnected from the real world on the streets. For these reasons, the multicultural bubble is by far the most serious challenge facing the peoples of Europe. If this bubble is not burst in time, it will explode in the form of interethnic violence, territorial imbalances, and the proliferation of lawless zones, territories, generally suburban, where the state has no authority. This phenomenon seemed almost exclusive to the United States until recent times, when it began to spread throughout Europe. Neighboring France currently incubates 500 lawless zones. In many of them, the state's authority has been replaced by Islamic Sharia. Thanks to their explosive demographics and the suicidal birth rate of native Europeans, these geopolitical black holes could end up absorbing entire regions of our continent, balkanizing and third-worldizing Europe in the medium term. Invasion. By Walter Romero. In recent weeks, we have watched in horror on television news as crowds desperate to escape Africa and the Middle East flee to the Old World. 3 analyses. First analysis. During the 1950s and 1960s, the inhabitants of the African continent demanded and fought for the independence of their respective countries. What did they want? To be governed by leaders of their own race and for the white colonizers to leave their countries. They succeeded. After so much demand and struggle, with many casualties, the inhabitants of dozens of African countries achieved freedom from white domination. Now, they could be ruled by the majority race on that continent, black Africans. So far, so normal. But what happened next, now that they had independence and power in their own hands? A bloody struggle between tribes of different ethnicities began. Torture, rape, mutilation, and murder. Blacks against blacks. Millions of dead and wounded everywhere. And it wasn't just Tutsis against Hutus. No. In almost all African countries, tribal wars spread across the continent. And after so many decades of independence, complete devastation. Millions and millions of Africans dying of hunger or being murdered. Africa became, under the leadership of its native rulers, red, black, a kind of hell on earth. But now they cannot blame white rulers anymore. They are far away from the African continent. The dominant race on that continent does not know how to govern itself in a more or less civilized manner. The struggle for power, and racial hatred, leads them to massacre each other. And there is no happy ending in sight. These wars and misery resulted in one of the largest invasions of refugees. The black Africans who fought for most of the second half of the 20th century to free themselves from whites, whom they couldn't stand, are now fleeing governments led by black Africans. They are seeking refuge in European countries governed by white people. Someone explain this to me because I don't understand it. Weren't they fighting against the white Satan, who oppressed them, tortured them, mistreated them, starved them, humiliated them? And now they want to be under white rule again. In a predominantly white continent. It seems that the colonial governments weren't as wicked as official history tells us. Otherwise, why are black Africans now seeking refuge in European governments? Well, something's fishy. Conclusion: hundreds of thousands of black Africans are escaping to Europe. Second analysis: the United States invaded Iraq, lying to its own people and the rest of the world. They claimed that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction and that it was logical to invade Iraq, overthrow the government, install one to their liking, and destroy the terrible weapons Saddam was hiding. We all know how that story ended. The United States did not invade the other countries in the Middle East, but they provided arms and money to the fighters for democracy, red mercenaries in the service of the Americans, in Libya, Syria, etc. And we know how those stories ended as well. In summary, the United States made a mess, and now they want Europeans to foot the bill by receiving hundreds of thousands of refugees. And they also give Europeans lessons in morality and good manners, demanding and telling them they have an obligation, sick, to welcome the invaders with open arms and bear the multimillion-dollar cost of this invasion. Conclusion: hundreds of thousands of refugees are fleeing hunger, misery, and war, coming from North Africa and the Middle East to Europe. Third analysis: during the 1980s and 1990s, the humanitarian, sensitive, welcoming, and charitable governments, both right-wing and left-wing, of Western Europe welcomed economic refugees and war refugees from Africa and the Middle East with open arms. Of course, it was just a few thousand refugees per year. They divided them among Sweden, Norway, the Netherlands, Spain, Italy, France, and Germany. And that was it. It wasn't much of a problem. All to show how good those governments were. And since the economic crisis hadn't reached Europe, it was no problem. But since the economic crash of 2008, with the European crisis and rising unemployment in old Europe, things have gotten worse. With the end of the famous European welfare state, the party came to an end. Rising unemployment. Once powerful economies fell like a house of cards. Formerly powerful economically and financially strong countries went bankrupt: Italy, Spain, Portugal, etc. And to add insult to injury, refugees started pouring in. Tens of thousands of them every month. Since the beginning of 2015, the average number of refugees from Africa and the Middle East to Europe has reached 41,000 per month. Yes, you read that right, dear reader. Per month. That's an average of almost 500,000 refugees per year. To whom you have to provide food, clothing, a place to live, etc. And how are they going to support so many refugees? Plus all those who have already entered in recent years. With the tax money that the citizens of these countries pay religiously. Well, here is where I draw the line. The era of humanitarian, sensitive, welcoming, charitable, is over. The party is over. It's not just the nationalist or anti-immigration parties that are going to cry foul. Even some left-wing unions, which are supposed to defend the interests of their workers, have already protested about this invasion. And wonder who will bear the costs of this invasion. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, desperate about what's coming, pleaded with her European community counterparts that the problem should be divided equally. The British government, which is ruthless but not stupid, has already washed its hands and said it won't accept a single refugee who can't prove they have a university education. Goodbye, they've already gotten rid of 99% of the refugees and passed the burden on to their partners. Regardless of what nationalist or anti-immigration parties may think, the European people, whether left, right, center, independent, from the top or from the bottom, must be holding their heads, or some other part of the human body, and screaming in protest. They know that this invasion will bring more unemployment, refugees are cheap labor, higher taxes to pay, increased crime, overloaded hospitals, misery, etc. European people do not want to pay the price for wars for which they, the Europeans, have no responsibility. Not for wars started by the Americans, with the blessing of the Israelis, and now they wash their hands. The future looks bleak for Europe. And even bleaker for the humanitarian European governments that will have to stop the uncontrolled influx of hungry and desperate people from Africa and the Middle East. Otherwise, the system trembles at the invasion. And it's not just the tens of thousands of refugees arriving in Europe that worries them the most. They are more concerned about a significant increase in followers of European nationalist parties. It is already apparent in Greece, where many of the refugees are entering Europe. Conservative and left-wing parties have already proven to be incapable of solving Europeans' problems. And they even lie to their people. Take the example of Syriza in Greece, where the leaders of this extreme left party lied shamelessly to their voters and, after gaining the necessary votes in last month's referendum, sold out to the international banks. This invasion will inevitably lead to, first, parliaments, and then to national governments, being filled with nationalist parties. It's already visible in France, where the National Front is now the largest force in French politics. Parties like Golden Dawn in Greece, Jobbik in Hungary, NPD in Germany, and others scattered throughout Europe are waiting to say present in their respective countries. And to provide solutions. Feminism as a social strategy. Feminism is not really about women's rights in society, it does not defend vulnerable and abused women. It is not truly a movement to motivate women to excel, to realize themselves as individuals, to transcend, set goals, and achieve success despite their responsibilities as mothers and more. No, feminism is a satanic ideology that seeks to destabilize society, divide families, take away a human being's right to live and give it to the mother, and get rid of anything that prevents her from advancing. It is a movement seeking to destroy the reputation of principled men, important figures, and influential personalities in politics, culture, art, entertainment, etc. Let's look at the concept, its origin, and purpose. We will send their women against their men and thus destroy the strength of their families. Helen Cohen, Jewish feminist. Feminism, from the Latin femina, woman, female, and ism, is a cultural Marxist subversion movement aimed at destabilizing, fracturing, and fragmenting society and stripping it of its natural functioning by manufacturing artificial conflicts between men and women based on the incitement that women are oppressed by men and that women are not different from men but exactly the same and capable of performing all of their functions. This movement cleverly disguises itself as a women's rights advocacy, which is why society does not perceive its true nature. The goal of feminism is to criminalize and demonize male behavior in men, as well as to disdain authentic femininity in women and victimize them as a collective. It promotes gender ideology, in which the ideal is for males to exhibit feminine behaviors and for females to exhibit masculine behaviors. It also directly promotes hatred toward the nature of males, misandry, for example, by repeating negative memes such as, all men are potential rapists. Consequently, women who follow feminist guidelines begin to be perceived negatively by men, ultimately generating misogyny, and the feminist ideological circle closes, fabricating an absurd and childish gender conflict. There has been an attempt to distinguish between true feminism as opposed to false feminism. The former is identified with egalitarianism and alleged legitimate women's rights claims, while the latter, referred to with dysphemisms like feminism derived from machismo, or more incorrectly, feminazism, is associated with more fanatical and intolerant forms. However, this distinction is only apparent. One may be more subtle or moderate in form, but the essence and objectives are the same, and so-called false feminism is simply the logical consequence of the principles of true feminism, cemented by Marxist theorists. Furthermore, contrary to what its proponents argue, feminism is not a movement for equality. Feminism is gynocentric. The feminist perspective, from its definition, theory, and practice, places women at the center of its thought and activity, which departs from the concept of equality, because it also negatively characterizes masculinity in males. Feminist propaganda. Feminism was created as a result of the practical application of the gender studies field of critical theory, which attacked Western European culture under the Marxist argument that women were oppressed by men, and that this oppression came solely from Western culture. Thus, critical theory made no mention of the oppression, much more serious and evident in various respects, of women from other peoples such as Asians, Africans, Native Americans, or Muslims. It only talked about oppression in the West, white women being oppressed by white men. Simultaneously with the advent of racial egalitarianism, the equally fictitious idea of sexual equality emerged. Women were told that they were psychologically equal to men but were socially conditioned by their environment to be wives and mothers instead of scientific researchers and industry captains. Not only did these self-proclaimed liberators of women try to convince them that raising and caring for the next generation was less important than sweating on an assembly line or working as a low-level executive, but they went even further by demeaning the role of wife and mother. Feminism has completely reshaped the family because most wives and mothers have been forced into the labor market by new capitalist economic standards, thus limiting the choices of those who would have preferred to take care of their homes. Moreover, the fact that women are sidelining child development, and the home allows children to be sent to school at an earlier age, where the system takes care of child rearing and indoctrination through cultural Marxism in school programs and mass media, growing up without family values. The so-called women's liberation and women's entry into the labor market within capitalism have doubled the workforce and, consequently, tax revenues have increased, consumption has grown exponentially, production costs, and therefore prices, have decreased, and wages have been reduced to less than half of their purchasing power or more. Destruction of masculinity and femininity. Instead of advocating for women as human beings with their own nature, feminism tries to strip them of their essence, their pure and natural femininity. Therefore, it is not just a movement against men but against all human beings. In this sense, feminism can be seen as an extreme form of sexism because it tells women that they should not be women but should be like men. In the West, natural femininity in women has started to be perceived as entirely negative due to feminism. Hollywood movies have attempted to impose the false archetype of the tough girl in the collective unconscious, the woman who uses weapons and participates in battles, which has nothing to do with reality. Femininity is actually perceived by feminists and cultural Marxists as weakness, incompetence, submissiveness, and uselessness. Consequently, according to feminism, a woman should never trust a man because there is no way he can be truly sincere with her, and all male attitudes are deviously distorted and reinterpreted according to the feminist agenda. For example, if a man finds you attractive, it means he wants to rape you. If he wants to protect you, it means he feels entitled to your body. If he says he loves you, it means he wants to possess and enslave you as his unpaid concubine until he finds a younger concubine to enslave with more words of love. Thus, if femininity in women can lead to their own downfall, then femininity is a negative trait that must also be fought against. So, women must adopt distorted masculine behaviors, be tougher, use foul language, humiliate and insult men, especially those who court them, and tell them that they don't need them for anything. This leads to the psychological emasculation of men. Men begin to fear behaving according to their nature because gender ideology says that it is immoral and negatively affects women. Therefore, men must become gentler, more submissive, must control their sexual impulses, so if they become homosexual, it's even better for feminism. New masculinities. Feminism considers masculinity, which it calls traditional masculinity, as harmful and negative. It characterizes it as violent, dominant, authoritarian, cruel, and inherently macho. For this reason, it advocates the need to change the concept of masculinity. Feminism promotes what it calls new masculinities. These would be different from traditional masculinity, and would make men sensitive, human, and empathetic. In a way, they want to feminize what they believe masculinity is. Feminism repudiates masculinity by arbitrarily assigning negative values and systematically forgetting values such as courage, protection of the family, the ability to sacrifice, initiative, etc. Consequences. If we organize, we kill them all. Women have a biological role that men, by nature, do not have gestating life. Their role in raising future generations has been of great value and essential since ancient times. However, feminism tells women that this power of theirs, maternity, has no value, that it represents an oppression that reduces them to mere objects. Therefore, the most serious consequence of feminism is that women do not become aware that they have a great and important mission to fulfill through the upbringing and education of future generations. Without the natural function of women, society is doomed to fail. Women unnaturally lose their femininity and are equated with men, taking on roles that have traditionally belonged to men since the beginning of humanity. There is a loss of female identity, and women begin to think and act like men, which is also related to phenomena such as lesbianism and misandry, hatred of men. Many researchers argue that the creation of millions of working mothers has had a disastrous effect on family stability and child development. The result has been that many women are now struggling as the sole providers for themselves and their children, and those who form a two-parent family often find themselves stressed and weakened by having to perform the traditional and natural work of women at home and work 8 hours a day outside it, thus consuming and dividing their efforts. The image of men is severely distorted in the name of gender equality laws, with implicit messages that men are an inferior form of life compared to women and that women do not need men. Promiscuity and irresponsible sex, under the banner of sexual liberation, are also embraced by feminist movements. Homosexuality, a social weapon. Some consider it a disease or hormonal disorder, while others see it as a psychotic aberration. However, in reality, homosexuality is a sin influenced by entities or spiritual hosts from the realm of darkness. In other words, they are demons that torment or pervert human thought. Many diseases are of demonic influence, so if you want to consider homosexuality a disease, I won't contradict you, but I want to clarify that this disease is of demonic influence, just like any other harmful, immoral, or perverted vice. Let me explain why. All human beings have been created by God with free will, which is the free choice to be or do what we want. God is not a dictator, He is a God of love and mercy. He is also a God of justice, so all justice leads to judgment when someone is guilty of breaking the law. In this case, God wisely established an order. Just as there are earthly and physical laws, there are also spiritual and divine laws. He knows that by nature, humans are sinners, disobedient, liars, hypocrites, and prone to immorality. Therefore, knowing that the people He created would sin or disobey His will, when He tested them in Eden, God already had a plan to redeem and save them from condemnation due to sin. That plan is called Jesus Christ and the Holy Gospel, Good News. Just as everything has an order that not even God can violate, He warned of the consequences of not obeying that created order. Therefore, God will bring every work to judgment, and through faith and obedience, we will be saved from judgment and eternal condemnation. Believing in God alone is not enough, we must obey Him. If someone claims to love God, they must subject all things to obedience to His word. God loves us all equally, but He will not declare the guilty as innocent. And if God established an order by creating a man and a woman for each other, how can we tempt God by doing the opposite of what He created, how He created it, and what He ordained? Does our opinion stand above spiritual and natural principles and laws? Do not deceive yourself, as it is written, all our righteousness are like filthy rags, before God, Isaiah 64 verse 6. Homosexuality is sin, aberration, depravity, and abomination. Here are just a few excerpts from the Book of Absolute Science, the Will of God, the Truth and Life, the Holy Scriptures or the Bible. Romans 1. 20-32. For His invisible attributes, namely, His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived, ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore, God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them but approve those who practice them. Leviticus 18. 22. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman, it is an abomination. 1 Timothy 1. 9-11. Understanding this, that the law is not laid down for the just but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and sinners, for the unholy and profane, for those who strike their fathers and mothers, for murderers, the sexually immoral, men who practice homosexuality, enslavers, liars, perjurers, and whatever else is contrary to sound doctrine, in accordance with the gospel of the glory of the blessed God with which I have been entrusted. 1 Kings 14. 24. And there were also male cult prostitutes in the land. They did according to all the abominations of the nations that the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. 1 Kings 15. 12. He put away the male cult prostitutes out of the land and removed all the idols that his fathers had made. Romans 1. 18-32. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For His invisible attributes, namely, His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived, ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. 1 Corinthians 6. 9-11. Or do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. And such were some of you. But you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God. 1 Timothy 1. 8-10. Now we know that the law is good, if one uses it lawfully, understanding this, that the law is not laid down for the just but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and sinners, for the unholy and profane, for those who strike their fathers and mothers, for murderers, the sexually immoral, men who practice homosexuality, enslavers, liars, perjurers, and whatever else is contrary to sound doctrine. Jude 1:7. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. Deuteronomy 23:17. None of the daughters of Israel shall be a cult prostitute, and none of the sons of Israel shall be a cult prostitute. Judges 19:22. As they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows, surrounded the house, beating on the door. And they said to the old man, the master of the house, Bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him. 1 Kings 22:46. And he put away from the land the remnant of the male cult prostitutes who remained in the days of his father Asa. Romans 1:26-27. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. 1 Timothy 1:9. Understanding this, that the law is not laid down for the just but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and sinners, for the unholy and profane, for those who strike their fathers and mothers, for murderers. Genesis 1:27-28. So God created man in his own image, in the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Homosexuality is a sexual preference, a conscious choice made by the individual who has decided to indulge in desires contrary to nature and God's order. However, being effeminate, which can be influenced by female hormones, is different from being homosexual. I know effeminate men who have wives and children and have never been attracted to other men. There are also many cases of women who have masculine traits but are clearly defined as women and marry men because that is the natural order of creation. When a young person or a minor has homosexual tendencies or is effeminate, it can be corrected in time because as long as they have not engaged in sexual activity with someone of the same sex, they cannot be considered homosexual. But instead of correcting it, if we approve and even celebrate it, then what we are doing is delivering that person to the enemy of souls, the devil himself, who has them bound. We cannot condone sin, even if we love someone, precisely because we love them. We should correct them while there is time, warning them if they are of legal age that it is a sin and leads to judgment. If they are minors, we should correct them with love, discipline, and in a timely manner. When a person is bound by sin, it takes root, and the more they engage in it, the more normal it will seem to them. They will find any excuse to justify their actions, thoughts, ideology, or way of being. Sometimes people become so accustomed to what is wrong that they end up accepting it and praising it. Remember that out of love for that person, you should not approve of their sin but prevent it with love, patience, and the Word of God. When we approve and defend sin as an individual's right to decide what they want to be and how they want to do it, we are not only putting their soul in danger but also our own. We are drawing judgment upon ourselves. Even worse, we are disrupting the order of things, which will gradually destroy society. As a consequence of this, we will later have to accept and give rights to pedophiles, exhibitionists, bigamists, polygamists, and incestuous individuals, those who engage in sex with animals. Don't be surprised that in this corrupt modern society, there are already cases of people seeking to marry their pets or domestic animals. Freedom of expression is now being used for the freedom of perversion. In fact, nowadays in many civilized, developed first world countries, there are many people who have animals as spouses, adults who live with minors, and nudist communities. Gradually, they will legalize it because the world imposes its sin, its aberration, its perversion, and its abominable way of life. Society accepts it, laws approve it, and curses and judgment are not far behind. This is why we witness so many changes in nature, because the earth groans because of sin, and we see that disasters are happening more frequently and much worse than in the past. As humans multiply on the earth, sin multiplies because natural man is a sinner and has no conscience of his sin. Romans 8:20-22, For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. Let's consider other opinions from experts on the subject. Homosexuality or gayness, from the Greek homo meaning same, and the Latin sexus meaning sex, is a psychological disorder of sexual identity development characterized by a set of behaviors and practices based on erotic attraction to individuals of the same sex. This psychosexual disorder falls under the category of paraphilias and has historically been considered by society as socially immoral and unnatural. Female homosexuality is commonly referred to as lesbianism. Bisexuality is the erotic attraction to both sexes and, therefore, involves a homosexual condition to a greater or lesser degree, depending on the individual. The official declassification of homosexuality as a disorder in health manuals in 1973 was solely the result of political pressure from gay activist groups and not the result of scientific research. In recent years, the influence of the gay lobby in politics and the culture and media has increased. The propaganda campaign it promotes seeks to have homosexuality recognized in society as an acceptable and respectable option, and as a normal variant of human sexuality. The gay political movement has decisively influenced public opinion, achieving most of its objectives, such as redefining the legal concept of marriage, weakening the traditional concept of the family, promoting the legal adoption of children, and the legalization of pedophilia. From a biological point of view, the human species is one of those that reproduce exclusively in a heterosexual manner, that is, between individuals of different sexes. Homosexuality, on the other hand, is incapable of generating life and has no defined biological purpose, although it has been thought that its primary function could be to counteract overpopulation. Whether this is true or not, homosexuality has always been an exceptional phenomenon for the simple reason that, had it been the norm, the human species would have disappeared centuries ago. Therefore, it is not normal in terms of the natural order. Normality, as Dr. Joseph Nicolosi states, is that which fulfills a function according to its own nature, and this is the concept of natural order. Individuals of the same sex are incompatible due to intrinsic and natural conditions, based on anatomy and physiology. Individuals of the same sex were not designed for mutual union. Definition as an illness. Disease is defined as an alteration of health, and health is defined as the state in which the organism normally performs all its functions. Therefore, disease would be a state in which the organism does not perform all its functions normally. Given that the three vital functions of all living beings are nutrition, relation, and reproduction, the condition of homosexuality could be considered an illness based on an alteration of the last function, as homosexual behaviors disrupt the continuity of the species. An objection made from various sectors of cultural Marxism to this definition is that a person's sexuality and their reproduction are completely separate, and therefore, someone with a sexual orientation different from that which is proper to the human species should not be considered sick. They also add that in today's times, there are many ways for a homosexual to have children without engaging with someone of the opposite sex. The first objection can be refuted by adhering to the definition of sexuality, which establishes that sexuality is the set of behaviors and attitudes related, among other things, to the performance of the reproduction function. As for the second objection, it is even simpler to refute. The fact that there are means to suppress the effects of a disease does not mean that the disease ceases to be a disease. A bronchodilator can relieve the effects of asthma, but asthma does not cease to be a disease. For the same reason, although a homosexual may be able to reproduce in various ways, this does not mean that they cease to be sick according to the definition of disease. Psychiatry. Richard von Krafft-Ebing, one of the fathers of modern psychiatry and whom Sigmund Freud himself recognized as his authority, considered homosexuality even a degenerative disorder in his 1886 work Psychopathia Sexualis. The scientific work of Freud, following the advent of psychoanalysis, resulted in a position that considered not only homosexual practices but also the mere condition of homosexuality as pathological. For example, in his 3 Essays on the Theory of Sexuality, 1905, Freud included homosexuality among sexual perversions or aberrations, in his own terms, equating it with fetishism, zoophilia, necrophilia, or sadomasochistic practices. According to Freud, homosexuality was a manifestation of a lack of sexual and psychological development, resulting in individuals being stuck in a pre-heterosexual stage. Although there is a letter from Freud from 1935, Letter to an American Mother, that is often used to argue that the Jewish doctor changed his mind about homosexuality, as he expressed in the letter that homosexuality is not a vice, nor a sign of degeneration, and cannot be classified as an illness. Psychoanalysts such as Alfred Adler and Carl Gustav Jung expressed even stricter views. Later psychoanalysts not only did not modify these medical judgments but also emphasized them while applying treatments for homosexuality. For example, in the 1940s, Sandor Rado argued that homosexuality was a phobic disorder towards individuals of the opposite sex, making it amenable to treatment like other phobias. In the 1960s, Irving Bieber and other psychiatrists, based on their analysis derived from working with a considerable number of homosexuals, claimed that homosexuality was a psychological disorder resulting from pathological family relationships during the Oedipal period. Furthermore, in that same decade, Charles Socarides defended the thesis that homosexuality originated in a pre-Oedipal period and therefore was much more pathological than previously thought. The subsequent relativization and denial of these medical judgments came from scientists like Dr. Alfred C. Kinsey, whose ideas were severely criticized by psychiatric science since then. Kinsey's studies fueled the sexual revolution, and 50 years later, the sexuality of anything goes has permeated all institutions in the world. Causes. There are various hypotheses about the causes of homosexuality. The most commonly considered factors fall into 2 sets, endogenous and exogenous. Endogenous or innate factors include genetic, biological, neurological, innate hormonal dysfunctions, etc. Exogenous or acquired factors are associated with psychological and environmental factors, including experiences during childhood development, influence and relationships with parents, as well as the presence of disproportionate levels of estrogens, female hormones, in food and the environment. Innate factors. Many sympathizers of the gay cause have wanted to defend a genetic cause for homosexuality, thinking that by doing so, they could validate an idea that has gradually spread even outside non-homosexual circles. This idea argues that if homosexuality is innate and not acquired, then it is not susceptible to change, and thus it would be a natural human behavior, eliminating its consideration as a pathology, disorder, or dysfunction once and for all. Militant homosexuals often use this idea of supposed genetic predisposition as an excuse to justify their behavior. However, even if homosexuality were genetically determined, conditions such as Down syndrome or color blindness are also genetic but are still considered pathologies, conditions that, furthermore, like homosexuality, have similar statistical incidence. Approximately 20 years ago in the United States, there was talk of the gay gene or the gay brain, but in reality, no study has proven such concepts. The most widely publicized studies regarding a possible genetic factor of homosexuality were conducted by Simon LeVay in 1991 and Dean Hamer in 1993. However, none of these studies have been successfully reproduced, and to this day, there is no evidence of a supposed gay gene. Human sexuality experts like William Masters and Virginia Eshelman Johnson had already maintained long before that the genetic theory of homosexuality had been largely discarded. Numerous authors who have carefully reviewed all publications attempting to validate the genetic predisposition of homosexuality have found that they not only fail to demonstrate a genetic basis for homosexual attraction but also, starting from their own biases and personal interests, do not even pretend to obtain scientific evidence for such an assertion. The studies in this regard are extremely flawed, inconclusive, and biased because they are typically conducted by homosexual scientists. Neil Whitehead, a doctor of biochemistry, stated, "Homosexuality is not innate, not genetically dictated, not immutable." Simon Lovey and the Gay Brain. Homosexual scientist and California gay rights activist Dr. Simon Lovey conducted a study on the brains of deceased homosexual men who had died of AIDS. His study focused on a group of cells in the hypothalamus known as INAH3. Lovey claimed to have found subtle but significant differences between the brain structures of homosexual and heterosexual men. He concluded the summary of his study by saying, "This finding suggests that sexual orientation has a biological basis." In 1991, the journal Science published an article reporting his alleged findings. According to the report, Dr. Lovey had examined a sample of cadavers, most of which belonged to homosexual individuals, and found a significant difference between the brains of homosexuals and those presumed to be heterosexual. The media seized upon this new discovery and reported it extensively throughout the United States. However, since the publication of the alleged finding, this study has been subject to severe criticism, as it was highly flawed. Firstly, the sample of cadavers that Dr. Lovey used for his study was very limited, consisting of only 40 cadavers. Secondly, the 24 cadavers of known homosexuals that were examined had died of AIDS or related complications, and it is known that the brain of an infected individual can undergo drastic changes. The brains of AIDS victims can shrink in size, their internal cavities called ventricles can expand, and portions of the cerebral cortex can be consumed. While treatments can be developed to halt the viral infection and allow the immune system to recover, brain damage is likely permanent. The remaining 16 cadavers, according to the study, were presumed to be heterosexual, but it was never confirmed whether they were indeed heterosexual or not. While most homosexuals and the media praised Dr. Lovey's discovery, some homosexuals even questioned the flawed method used in the study. Milco Baute, a famous homosexual writer, wrote, "Such careless control as Dr. Lovey's invalidates the study." Therefore, in 1993, Lovey attempted to downplay or justify his mistake by writing that he was not trying to prove a genetic predisposition to homosexuality, partially evading the methodological errors of his flawed study. For many people, finding a difference in brain structure between homosexual and heterosexual men amounts to proving that homosexuals were born that way. I did not. My observations were made only on adults who had been sexually active for a considerable period of time. It is not possible, based only on my observations, to say whether structural differences were present at birth and later influenced men to become homosexual or whether they appeared in adulthood, perhaps as a result of their sexual behavior. Michael Bailey and Richard Pillard's study focused on twins. If homosexuality were genetically determined, then one could expect that a pair of identical twins would also be identical in their sexual attractions. However, Bailey and Pillard could not establish this. Their study showed that when one twin was homosexual, there was approximately a 50-50 chance that the other twin would also be homosexual. Nevertheless, these 50-50 probabilities are more attributable to the influence of the surrounding culture and the other twin. As Dr. Dean Bird points out, the only essential point that emerges from Bailey and Pillard's research is that environmental influences play a strong role in the development of homosexuality. Dean Hamer and the gay gene. Another study that drew national attention was conducted by Dr. Dean Hamer, a scientist at the National Institutes of Health. He claimed that a region on the X chromosome, the XQ28 section, was related, in some cases, to homosexuality. After analyzing this DNA sequence in 40 pairs of homosexual brothers, he concluded that the same genetic markers existed in 83% of them. However, when the same study was conducted with lesbians, the supposed genetic link was not found. Dr. Hamer's work is now under investigation by the Office of Research Integrity because his assistants alleged that Dr. Hamer intentionally altered information to conveniently fit his final conclusion. Others argue that Hamer's findings were simply misinterpreted, and that's why they were presented as evidence that homosexuality is genetic and hereditary. However, as Dr. Hamer himself stated, inheritance didn't produce what we originally expected to find, simple Mendelian inheritance. In fact, we never found a single family in which homosexuality was transmitted according to the obvious model that Mendel observed in his pea plants. Dr. George Rice reconducted Dr. Hamer's research but with different results. This led Dr. Rice to conclude, our data do not support the presence of a major gene influencing sexual orientation at position XQ28. Dr. Joseph Nicolosi of the National Association for Research and Therapy of Homosexuality, NRTH, who has worked with over 200 homosexuals, commented to the press on the limited progress in the search for the gay gene. He asserts that what homosexuals are seeking is a biological test that identifies them as a different or special population. Hence, they cling to any evidence that supports this idea, no matter how fragmented it may be, in order to say, we were born this way. Medical consequences of homosexual activity. In addition to addressing a disorder of psychosexual development, homosexuality, especially male homosexuality, meets the criteria required to classify it as a syndrome, understood as the set of symptoms with clear physical consequences that characterize a particular disease. Health professionals like Dr. Edward R. Fields and Dr. Kathleen Melanakos have delved into this issue. Homosexual practice reduces life expectancy by 20 years, increases the risk of AIDS by 5 to 10 times, and between 70% and 78% of homosexuals report having had some sexually transmitted disease. The medical consequences, diseases, and physical harm to which active homosexuals are vulnerable can be summarized as follows. Sexually transmitted diseases. 78% of homosexuals contract sexually transmitted diseases such as HIV, AIDS, gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis, herpes simplex, genital warts, pubic lice, scabies, etc. AIDS is not a disease of homosexuals per se but rather a disease of promiscuity. However, since homosexuals are much more promiscuous than heterosexuals, AIDS initially became a pandemic through homosexual activities and then spread to other segments of the population. In fact, if it weren't for the growing homosexual activity, this affliction would not have spread throughout America and Europe. Homosexual activity is the only reason why, in 1992, 83% of all AIDS cases in the United States occurred among homosexual and bisexual men. Bisexual men are the main means of transmission of this disease to the heterosexual community through normal heterosexual activity with an unfortunate partner who may later pass on the disease to their offspring or other men. According to the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, homosexual men have between 500 and 1,000 times greater risk of contracting AIDS than the heterosexual population in general. According to the Journal of the American Medical Association, 50% of men with AIDS had sex with an adult male before the age of 16, and 20% did so before the age of 10. Dr. Jeffrey Satanova reports that 30% of all homosexual men at the age of 20 will be HIV positive or dead by the age of 30. One might think that the ethical approach would be, let's use anything that works to try to get these people out of their risky behavior. If it means using condoms, fine. If it means stopping anal intercourse, fine. If it means leaving homosexuality, fine. But this last intervention is the only one that is absolutely taboo. The fact that the APA has evaded responsibility for its lack of scientific and professional integrity is especially incredible given the advent of the AIDS epidemic. In the United States, there are currently an estimated 900,000 people infected with the HIV virus, which is 1 in every 300 Americans. Although there has been a yearly decrease in AIDS deaths due to drug therapy, therapy that costs an average of $12,000 per patient per year, the rate of new infections per year has remained the same, with about 40,000 people becoming infected each year, despite 20 years of safe sex campaigns. These facts demonstrate the failure of current policies to contain the AIDS epidemic. While drug therapy will briefly extend the lives of these patients, AIDS remains the fifth leading cause of death among people aged 25 to 44, and 60% of new cases are contracted by men who have had homosexual relations. Enteric diseases. The gay bowel disease or gay bowel syndrome is a chronic infection of various intestinal parasites, including species such as Staphylococcus aureus, Shigella, Campylobacter jejuni, Salmonella, Entamoeba histolytica, Giardia lamblia, hepatitis A, B, C, D, and cytomegalovirus. It also includes proctitis and proctocolitis caused by herpes simplex virus, Gonococcus, Chlamydia trachomatis, and Treponema pallidum. According to the San Francisco Department of Public Health, between 70% and 80% of the 75,000 reported cases of hepatitis in that city occur among homosexuals. They account for 29% of the cases in Denver, 66% in New York, 56% in Toronto, 42% in Montreal, and 26% in Melbourne. Hepatitis A can spread through contaminated water or food and is easily transmitted in schools. Hepatitis C is transmitted through blood and sexual contact. Hepatitis, tuberculosis, and intestinal parasites can be contracted through the saliva of infected individuals working in restaurants or handling food or even being in close proximity to food. Depending on the city, between 39% and 59% of homosexuals have been infected with intestinal parasites such as worms, flukes, and amoebas. Traumas related to anal intercourse. Anal sex is practiced by 90% of homosexuals, and 2/3 engage in it regularly, according to a study by Corey and Holmes. The study group had an average of 110 different sexual partners and 68 annual anal relations. The likely consequences are fecal incontinence, hemorrhoids, anal fissures, foreign bodies lodged in the rectum, rectosigmoid tears, allergic proctitis, penile edema, chemical sinusitis, burns from inhaled nitrites, etc. The anus and rectum are organs with the sole and exclusive function of excreting the body's digestive waste. They do not have their own production of lubricants necessary to facilitate penetration, their mucosa is extremely delicate, and their blood vessels can easily tear, leading to bleeding. Psychological disorders. Homosexual individuals are at a higher risk of suffering from mental illnesses such as depression and suicidal tendencies, anxiety, conduct disorders, alcoholism, drug addiction, and violence. In fact, there is much more violence within the community itself than originating from outside it. Homosexuals, both men and women, have a 14 times higher probability of attempting suicide than heterosexuals. According to the Canadian Rainbow Health Coalition, CHRC, homosexuals have a 3 times higher probability of succeeding in their suicide attempts compared to heterosexuals. Alcoholism affects between 20% and 30% of the homosexual population. 35% of lesbians have a history of excessive drinking, compared to 5% of heterosexual women. Additionally, approximately 30% of homosexuals and lesbians are drug addicts. A study conducted by the University of California, UCLA, on nearly 2,000 residents in the California area showed that the homosexual population is at a higher risk than heterosexuals for the consumption and abuse of addictive substances. It was found that within a year, 48.5% of homosexuals sought detox clinics, compared to 22.5% of heterosexuals. The theory of the existence of multiple genders. One of the latest theories, put forward to explain homosexuality is supposedly based on social Darwinism. Proposed by Stanford University biology professor Joan Ruff Garden, this theory opposes Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection in sexual selection, denying the natural existence of sexuality in 2 sexes or genders, one male and one female. It uses examples from animal species and different cultures outside the Western world, claiming that nature and different societies offer surprising solutions to sexuality. It cites fish with various types of males or whose components change sex when necessary, and mammals that have both male and female reproductive organs, hermaphrodites, among others. In the case of human biology, it argues that the existence of homosexuals, transsexuals, and hermaphrodites is nothing more than a natural variation that fits perfectly into the diversity displayed by other animals. The social expression of this diversity would supposedly be found in societies such as Native Americans, Polynesian Mahu, Indian Hijra, or eunuchs, which are identified as transgender people. However, some animals that change sex, such as certain species of frogs and fish, do so naturally and under specific extreme conditions, such as when there is a higher number of females than males in the population, and females need to compensate for this imbalance by completely changing their reproductive structure in order to mate and solely for the purpose of reproduction. Transsexuals are not at all a variation of this kind because they do not meet two fundamental criteria. The apparent change of sex in transsexual humans is achieved artificially through surgical procedures and hormone treatments. This change of sex is done for any imaginable purpose except reproduction. An article published by Rough Garden's laboratory in the journal Science was heavily criticized. 40 scientists wrote 10 letters, and one of them even said it was very poor quality science and scholarship. Queer theory. Gay activists have developed a sexual ideology called queer theory, which is currently promoted as a scientific explanation of human sexuality. It posits the idea that all sexual orientations, both heterosexuality and homosexuality, and people's sexual or gender identity are the result of a social construction and, therefore, there are no biologically inscribed gender roles in human nature, but socially variable ways of playing one or several gender roles. Thus, both heterosexual attraction and masculine-feminine attraction, as well as gender roles adopted by the human species since prehistory, such as the provider role of the father and the home and family care role of the mother, are supposedly artificial phenomena created arbitrarily by society and culture, without any functional evolutionary basis. This theory denies any relationship with the sexual nature manifest in the animal kingdom in general and particularly in mammals. This theory, while displacing homosexuality outside the realm of what is strictly natural, does the same with heterosexuality, making each one an equivalent phenomenon. Furthermore, it attempts to establish that biology has nothing to do with how one sex is attracted to the other, following the sexual instinct that is essential for procreation and the survival of the species. Homosexuality in marital status, gay mania. Gay activists have succeeded in expanding supposed rights within the social structure of several countries. These rights include social, cultural, and legal recognition that regulates the relationship and cohabitation of two people of the same sex, with the same requirements and effects as those existing for heterosexual marriages, that is, institutions formed between two people of the opposite sex. According to the Royal Spanish Academy, marriage is the union of a man and a woman solemnized through certain rites or legal formalities. Adoption of children by homosexuals. The adoption of children is one of the privileges granted to homosexuals that has generated much debate and opposition. Children are the result of the exclusive union of a man and a woman. Having children is not an inherent or characteristic aspect of homosexual relationships, nor is it an incontrovertible and undeniable natural fact. No matter how much a man has sex with another man or a woman with another woman, it is not possible to conceive an embryo. Sexual nature did not establish that individuals would be the product of homosexual unions, and for the same reason, it did not establish that they would be raised by homosexuals. If nature had wanted it that way, opponents to these privileges would have nothing to discuss about it. However, due to this one natural and evident principle, the majority of society rejects gay adoption. Gradually, as this privilege is imposed and develops in society, its consequences also emerge. In Spain, judges who have shown reluctance or have not approved custody of children from previous relationships in favor of gay couples have been punished. A well-known example of this type of harassment is the removal of Judge Calamita in Murcia, who was promptly expelled from the judicial career. According to a longitudinal study published in 1997 in the Journal of Orthopsychiatry, Gallenbach and Tasker, as adults, children raised by lesbians have a 24% higher incidence of homosexual relationships than children of heterosexual mothers. Homosexuality and child sexual abuse. Another aspect that concerns the gay movement is the effort to reduce the legal age of consent for same-sex relationships. One point in the debate that does not receive much publicity is the issue of pedophilia. Various studies show that between 22% and 60% of homosexuals are or have been pedophiles. Not a few homosexual groups even want to make sexual activity between adults and children permissible, and some psychologists seek to have pedophilia considered an acceptable sexual behavior. A recent study by the Family Research Council analyzes attempts to lower the age of consent in various parts of the world. Alfred C. Kinsey himself claimed that 95% of men commit sexual offenses, so society should redefine the concept of normal and reduce sanctions for such offenses. He spoke on behalf of child abusers, and his work contributed to changing laws to be lenient on sexual offenses. Kinsey attempted to promote his ideology through sex education in 1964, and the Kinsey Institute launched the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States, SIECUS, which is recognized by the United Nations and has become very influential. SIECUS sex education teaches 5-year-old children about masturbation and that engaging in sexual behaviors with others is a display of affection. The Kinsey Institute offers scholarships in honor of John Money, a pioneer of gender identity, and responsible for the sex reassignment of a child narrated in the book The Boy Who Was Raised as a Girl. Ultimately, the boy committed suicide. Money's gender identity clinic at Johns Hopkins Hospital was closed down by his successor. The American Psychiatric Association, which is mostly composed of gay activists, has stated that another myth about homosexuality is the mistaken belief that homosexuals are more likely to sexually abuse children than heterosexuals. There is no evidence that homosexuals are more likely to sexually abuse children than heterosexuals. However, Dr. Judith A. Reisman, a research professor at American University, confirms that only 9% of the heterosexual population is pedophilic. In contrast, the pedophilic homosexual population reaches 60%. In other words, 87% of the pedophilic population is homosexual, while the remaining 13% is heterosexual. According to U.S. government statistics in 1992, between 17% and 24% of boys under 18 are victims of homosexual abuse, compared to 0.9% of girls who are victims of abuse by heterosexuals. Vaccines, pandemics, and diseases. As I mentioned earlier, among the theories or methods that have been discussed and funded for the reduction of the world's population are diseases created in laboratories and experimented on in third world countries, especially in the African continent. This includes diseases like AIDS, Ebola, Zika, to name just a few. These are viruses and bacteria that have claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people and continue to do so. However, just as this kind of bacteriological warfare is used against the civilian and defenseless population, cancer, diabetes, and many others are also intentionally provoked and have become a business. Just as they find vaccines to counter viruses and bacteria before they become pandemics and wipe out entire populations, they also have cures for cancer and diabetes, among others. But since these epidemics are a business, they will never provide a definitive solution to save the lives of those who suffer. Instead, they will continue to extract money from them while they are alive, and if possible, burden families after they have passed away. This business benefits the food industry, or better known as the poisoning industry, clinics, hospitals, laboratories, the pharmaceutical industry, health insurance companies, funeral homes, cemeteries, and even the government. It is highly profitable and contributes to the extermination of the sick population. In the 21st century, we have not been able to control even half of degenerative and deadly diseases. Getting sick is a strategy, staying sick is a convenience, and shortening our lives is a task. In my book, What They Don't Want You to Know, I explain in detail the topic of health, how they are killing us, and how these diseases, viruses, bacteria, and epidemics are a multi-billion-dollar business that benefits many. The same can be said of vaccines against viruses. How Does the New World Order Kill Us? By Mario Lamo Jimenez. According to Natural News, the great culling of the human population has already begun. Secretly, insidiously, without mercy, a global depopulation agenda has been set in motion. As it unfolds, the vast majority of the human race will be removed from the genetic pool. Genetically annihilated. Will you and your genetic lineage survive? This apocalyptic question marks the beginning of an article that reveals the Nazi-style extermination agenda to which we are being subjected, courtesy of the world's masters, the 0.1% who control banks, states, war, and death. Right now, under our very eyes, from our own skies, we are being attacked, silently but no less lethally, and most people are unaware of it. The first thing the unbelievers, those who don't want to believe, and those who want to make us believe otherwise will say is that this is just another conspiracy theory. The information is available for those who are willing to investigate and whose reasoning faculties have not yet been destroyed in this undeclared bacteriological, toxicological, and ideological war. Figures like Bill Gates and Ted Turner, Nature News asserts, openly discuss reducing the world's population by 90%. Bill Gates, in particular, happily funds infertility technology, vaccines, and GMOs, genetically modified organisms, all of which are intentionally designed to cause infertility and halt new baby births, resulting in a significant population decline. But it goes beyond reducing the human population. The goal is to eliminate 90% of the world's population. The word for this is, of course, eugenics. Adolf Hitler based his philosophy on the same concept, improving the human race through genocide. Eliminating the weak, the ugly, the stupid. Igniting the incinerators, disarming the selected people to be exterminated, and leading them like sheep to gas chambers or open-air cemeteries. The Nazis did win World War II. All Nazi techniques of extermination, brainwashing, control through a police state, were perfectly assimilated by the victors, and not only did they assimilate them, but they expanded and refined them. And they eventually gave birth to their child, the New World Order, the bastard child of the Nazi state that gained legitimacy through Western control mechanisms, IMF, World Bank, politics, military power, and propaganda, television networks, press, the internet, etc., in addition to charitable foundations that graciously help us annihilate ourselves. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for example, provides significant funding to the University of North Carolina to develop infertility ultrasound technology that could make human sperm non-viable for up to 6 months. The BBC reports that this technology was effectively tested on rats and is just one of the 78 research projects funded by the Gates Foundation under the guise of global health programs. Bill Gates explained his famous depopulation agenda through the use of vaccines to a live audience in 2010. Today, the world has 6.8 billion people, that's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, health care, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. Eliminate the weak. The ultimate goal is a Darwinian elimination of a large part of humanity, where only the strongest will survive. For the rulers, the vast majority of the masses are dumbed-down consumers, immersed in video games, television, and junk food, who cannot offer any significant contribution to the future of human civilization. Humans have ceased to be humans. Those in power have become a ruthless and unscrupulous mafia, whose sole objective is to have economic power, backed by military power, exploit the Earth's resources until there is nothing left to exploit, and foster global chaos to annihilate the weak, while they prepare to lock themselves in their bunkers and the poles melt, and 8 billion people, like the Silence of the Lambs, are led to the global slaughterhouse, globalization, trade agreements, pre-programmed economic crises, deforestation, global warming, cancer, and oil wars that began long before the first invasion of Iraq and continue to expand in the Middle East to this day. According to them, the annihilation of the population makes humanity stronger, much in the same way that culling the weak from a herd of wild animals improves the overall genetic stock of the focus species. The human genetic heritage, they say, is deteriorating, and the only way to improve it for a species capable of reaching the stars is to eliminate those who are not smart enough to deserve a place in that genetic pool. How they are killing us. This is the most incredible point of this story, as old methods of annihilation have been replaced by new and sophisticated techniques of genocide, so that the exterminated become their own exterminators. In some cases, the New World Order provides us with weapons for us to pull the trigger ourselves, and what's more, we end up paying for it. These are covert methods, based on persuasion and propaganda. As we all know, poison is ingested through the mouth, and what better way than to make us supply it to ourselves? To begin with, there are the infamous GMOs, or genetically modified foods, which lead to infertility. They are everywhere. Monsanto, or better said, Mon Diablo, leads the list of multinational poison companies with its genetically modified seeds. It's not about feeding humanity better, but giving them the food of their own extermination. These genetically modified seeds and foods are followed by a long list, topped by water, without which we cannot survive. It's loaded with fluoride along with thousands of chemical residues, most of which are carcinogenic, causing mass deaths and abortions. Since no population group is left untouched, there are also vaccines, filled with mercury that cause irreparable damage to the brain and even death. To this weakened and mentally diminished population, they present a great intelligence test. If you are stupid enough to consume our poisons, then you truly deserve to die. The intelligence test. It is important to note that the genocidal properties of vaccines, GMOs, chemical food additives, medications, and other synthetic chemicals serve as a kind of intelligence test for the population. This is the diabolical equation of the New World Order, to get rid of the stupid ones, i.e., those who are not mentally fit to reach the stars. The stupid ones will supply their own poison unknowingly. This is the trap. Through mass propaganda, television commercials, magazines, radio, and print media, people are offered a modern lifestyle, in which everything comes prepackaged. Thoughts come canned, and multinational poison companies like Nestle are responsible for distributing the modern poison that slowly kills brain neurons, ensuring that people lose their reasoning ability more and more. The poison is called monosodium glutamate, a flavor enhancer. According to their poisonous language of propaganda, it is meant to improve the taste of food. Anyone who falls into the trap of buying this product has already proven, according to the NWO, that they deserve to die. Why on earth would humans need a flavor enhancer that enhances the taste of nothing? Monosodium glutamate is an excitotoxin. What is an excitotoxin? As the name suggests, it is a toxic product that excites. It causes brain neurons to fire continuously until they die over the course of an hour. It is a slow death of the brain that can result in multiple terminal illnesses, including Alzheimer's. In short, it is a lethal drug that is openly sold, disguised in various forms, including as a seasoning. The merchants of death and poison claim that their product is made up of spices, herbs, and other fantastic things that will make the food taste better. In fine print or on the bottom of the packaging, the reality is hidden. The herbs make up 10%, and the poison makes up 90%. The flavor enhancer ends up killing the sense of taste, and the addict can no longer perceive natural flavors because they are all neutralized by what supposedly enhances them. There couldn't be a better metaphor for the New World Order. It kills from behind and wants us to believe that its poison is the taste, until we are unable to taste anything. Next on the list are people who routinely get vaccinated. Anyone who uses vaccines also falls into the category of the stupid ones who deserve to die. Vaccines serve as a perfect filter for removing the stupid ones from the human gene pool. This is undoubtedly the reason why globalists heavily promote vaccines in low-income families, It is important to note that vaccines contain invisible cancer viruses that are passed down from generation to generation. The SV40 viruses introduced into the population through polio vaccines in the 1950s still exist today in the grandchildren of those who were first vaccinated. This is openly admitted by top scientists who helped develop these vaccines. Death from above. These are innocent streaks in the sky that many people confuse with contrails left by airplanes. Most people don't notice them, and for those who do, they are nothing more than a curiosity without significance. Unlike vapor trails, chemical trails don't disappear in a few minutes, they spread until they finally release their poisonous rain of heavy metals and bacteriological agents. They are being dispersed around the planet over major population centers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They can be seen in the skies of Europe, Latin America, the United States, and the rest of the world, performing their deadly duty. Planes flying at high altitudes cover the sky with streaks until the blue sky disappears and turns into a contaminated gray color. Some say it's for climate control, while others find it a great mystery without explanation. However, the reality is dirtier and deadlier than anyone can imagine. On a clear day in California, planes begin to create a massive X in the sky, drawing dozens of X-shaped streaks, and when the poison cloud spreads, it erases the sun from the landscape. They can also be seen in the Bogotá sky. Why is Colombia authorized to be sprayed with this poison, as well as the rest of the world? It's just a rhetorical question. Complicity with the New World Order transcends geographical and political boundaries. Once we are sprayed with the poison from the sky, symptoms don't take long to appear. Respiratory problems. Headaches. Sinusitis. Swelling of lymph nodes. Cough/respiratory distress. Generalized respiratory failure. Damage to the heart and liver. Various news sources have reported that chemical trails have been photographed via satellite over Iraq and Saudi Arabia during the Gulf War and now cover the skies of the United States. How can such a grandiose scheme of planetary engineering be kept secret? Well, think about how long the horrors of Agent Orange among the Vietnamese people, the Gulf War illness that left thousands of fighters disabled or dead, or the 16,000 deaths at Chernobyl have been hidden from a drugged, indifferent, and disillusioned public. Hundreds of thousands of people around the world are being killed or incapacitated by this unprecedented poisonous spraying in the history of humanity. The planet is being turned into a gigantic gas chamber where the Pentagon and its partners in international banking, as well as the 100 families that rule the planet, have initiated a global extinction program, perhaps unseen since a meteorite crashed into Earth 65 million years ago, blocking the sunlight in a kind of nuclear winter that wiped out the dinosaurs. The current rulers of the world want to exterminate 90% of the human race. In fact, this process began decades ago, but only now are we witnessing our own annihilation. We have two options: either we go like sheep to the slaughter, or we become aware of the situation and resist. The governments of every country in the world must answer to their citizens why they are allowing us to be sprayed from the sky with a deadly toxic mixture. For example, could Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos explain why he authorized Colombia to be sprayed? Why is this poisonous spraying kept secret? From the sky to the table, we are being poisoned, every day, every hour, with every meal, every time we breathe, every second we exist. There is a global conspiracy to eliminate 90% of humanity, and the first step to defeat it is to know that it exists. And one final interesting fact: a former White House chef for the governments of Bush and Obama revealed that only organic food, without additives or preservatives, was served at the White House. No GMOs or MSG, monosodium glutamate. Those at the top don't want to kill their neurons while they legislate for the masses to die a slow and poisonous death. Vaccines used as a vector for depopulation experiments. By Leonor de Cisneros. June 2018. Every investigation into vaccines ultimately leads to Bill Gates, the Nazis, and eugenics. After defending his decision to screen the controversial documentary Vaxxed at the Tribeca Film Festival, Robert De Niro succumbed to public pressure and removed the film from the lineup. But it wasn't just public criticism that influenced De Niro's decision. It has recently been discovered that De Niro was pressured by the Sloan Foundation linked to the Nazis in New York to sabotage the documentary. The Sloan Foundation is named after Alfred P. Sloan, a Nazi collaborator who hated both Jews and blacks. Like Bill Gates, Sloan had a keen interest in the eugenics movement, which eventually became the Human Genome Project. The reason the Sloan Foundation was able to pressure De Niro to pull the documentary is that the organization has an association with the Tribeca Film Festival. As the festival's website states, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, based in New York City, was founded in 1934 and makes grants in science, technology, and economic performance. The Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, in partnership with the Tribeca Film Institute, provides funding for scientifically relevant, accurate, and exciting narrative features or series through the TFI Sloan Filmmaker Fund. Meanwhile, sources at Zen Gardner revealed the true colors of Alfred P. Sloan as a Nazi collaborator and elitist pro-eugenicist. Industrialist Alfred P. Sloan, as head of General Motors, was a Nazi collaborator and fervent admirer of Hitler. Sloan's hatred of blacks was almost as intense as his hatred of Jews. He had a close relationship with the eugenics movement that eventually became the Human Genome Project. The Sloan Foundation, along with the Rockefeller Connection, maintained a long-standing interest in population reduction, including involvement in introducing new mysterious vaccines along with the World Health Organization, which has a stated population reduction policy, as clearly set out in Agenda 21. This dubious enterprise gave rise to a mass vaccination initiative to vaccinate against relatively rare tetanus in the Philippines, Nicaragua, and Mexico. It was discovered that these vaccine vials, distributed by the WHO, contained HCG, which when combined with tetanus toxoid carrier stimulates the formation of antibodies against human chorionic gonadotropin, incapacitating women from maintaining a pregnancy and potentially inducing a covert and involuntary abortion. Population control under the guise of healthcare. This seemingly altruistic Sloan Foundation also funded the Community Blood Council of Greater New York Incorporated, which allowed more than 10,000 hemophiliacs and countless others to become fatally infected with HIV/AIDS. Furthermore, the Sloan Foundation held 24,000 to 53,000 shares issued by Merck & Company, whose president George W. Merck was director of the U.S. biological weapons industry and whose hepatitis C and polio vaccines were suspected of transmitting AIDS, and who knows what else. Population control, AIDS, Ebola and other man-made diseases, S.R. Shearer, July 29, 2014. Dr. Leonard Horowitz's seminal work, AIDS and Ebola, Nature, Accident, or Intentional, argues that both Ebola and AIDS were designed by scientists working for the CIA. Paul Josko currently serves as president of the Sloan Foundation. He is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, which has financial connections to the Gates Foundation. The Gates Foundation has developed a reputation for insularity in terms of its grants, only funding organizations that agree to promote its pro-vaccine agenda. Almost all pro-vaccine websites are funded and owned by Big Pharma or the Gates Foundation. In other words, both the Gates Foundation and the Sloan Foundation are investing in and promoting vaccines in an effort to reduce the world population. In fact, according to Bill Gates, if we do a great job with new vaccines, we could reduce the world population by perhaps 10 or 15%. The Gates Foundation's interest in reducing the world population is not limited to vaccines either. The organization has a history of funding depopulation efforts, including research into the deliberate destruction of sperm with ultrasound technology. The lesson to be learned: once you scratch the surface and peel back the layers, all vaccine investigations end up as a Bill Gates medicine. United Nations Agenda 21, Depopulating the Planet. By Carlos Vilches Navamule, September 2017. In 1972, the Club of Rome commissioned the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to create a report titled The Limits to Growth. The primary author of the report, which involved the collaboration of 17 professionals, was Donella Meadows, a biophysicist and environmental scientist specializing in systems dynamics. Among other conclusions, they stated that, if the current trends of world population growth, industrialization, pollution, food production, and resource depletion continue unchanged, the limits to growth on this planet will be reached within the next 100 years. It was undeniably a flawed, controversial, and catastrophist report that, when examined today, reveals that food production has been continuously increasing with improved technologies, environmental awareness has grown, and population growth is projected to slow down after 2050 due to increased knowledge. An internet source named Wake Up, We Live a Lie explains in an article titled United Nations Document reveals the plan to depopulate 95% of the world by 2030 to create the New World Order, that, the United Nations, for some people, evokes an image of a benevolent organization dedicated to preserving human life wherever conflict arises, promoting cooperation, and international peace above all else. But far from this peaceful image, its plan to depopulate the world by 95% by 2030 is a reality, and this plan is called Agenda 21. The same source adds that, in the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs and the Division for Sustainable Development's Agenda 21, it appears to have been developed as a means to restructure the world population to reduce environmental impact and improve quality of life. However, one of the main ways to achieve this is through direct and specific depopulation. As the UN states, an extensive plan of action will be adopted at a worldwide, national, and local level by United Nations organizations, governments, and major groups in every area where humans have a malign impact on the environment. The official UN website explains that, at the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, UNCED, held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, from more than 178 governments adopted Agenda 21, the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, and the Statement of Principles for the Sustainable Management of Forests at the 14th of June, 1992. The Commission on Sustainable Development, CSD, was created in December 1992 to ensure effective follow-up of UNCED, monitor and report on implementation of the agreements at the local, national, regional, and international levels. Another document apparently dated September 1994 from the U.S. Senate titled United Nations Biodiversity Assessment on Human Population and Development tells us that, a reasonable estimate for an industrialized world society at the present North American material standard of living would be 1 billion people. This must be achieved within 30 to 50 years, 2/3 of the population must be cut. It further adds that, the UN says property rights are not absolute and immutable but are there for the convenience of any government that wants to take them. At the Rio de Janeiro summit, it was decided that the Global Environmental Facility would be the custodian of all property rights. All of the above has been confirmed in various global forums. For example, at the World Summit on Sustainable Development held in Johannesburg, South Africa, from August 26 to September 4, 2002, full implementation of Agenda 21, the program for the further implementation of Agenda 21, and commitments to the principles of Rio were reaffirmed. Not long ago, in June 2015, there was information that spread like wildfire in the media and on social networks. The news stated that Costa Rican Cristiana Figueres, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, had declared, "We must do everything possible to depopulate the planet." This confirms that one of the objectives of Agenda 21 is to control global population growth. Figueres allegedly said in an interview, "The Earth is overburdened with people, and we must consider depopulating the planet. We really must do everything possible to change because we are currently exceeding the planet's carrying capacity." She also openly stated earlier in the year that the true purpose of global warming is to end capitalism. We assume that by saying this, she referred to the failed theory of global warming. Chemtrails. What are chemtrails and how are they harming our food and water? By Ty Bollinger. November 11, 2015. In the late 1960s, Monsanto supported the secret MUAD-DIB geoengineering lab to develop chemtrail technology, their crown jewel program to protect Earth from global warming via weather control. What are chemtrails? Chemtrails are geoengineered aerosols that are loaded with toxic chemicals, including but not limited to barium, strontium-90, aluminum, cadmium, zinc, viruses, and chaff. Chaff looks like snow, but it's actually mylar fibers, like in fiberglass, coated with aluminum, desiccated blood cells, plastic, and paper. Polymer chemist Dr. R. Michael Castle has studied atmospheric polymers for years, and he has identified microscopic polymers comprised of genetically engineered fungal forms mutated with viruses, which are now part of the air we breathe. Chemtrails have nothing to do with the jet engine combustion process. They are often laid in a grid-like pattern by multiple planes, even drones, where they disperse slowly, taking on the appearance of odd, at first narrow, but widening, smoky clouds until merging together to form, if sufficiently numerous, an aerosol bank that obscures the blue sky and gives the appearance of a dirty white overcast. Unlike normal contrails which quickly dissipate, chemtrails, fake clouds, as my children call them, sometimes take hours to dissipate and eventually fan out to a spider web type of milky haze that covers the entire sky. As these are formed from minute reflective metallic particulates, they eventually reach the Earth. Still having doubts? Please download this PDF file called H.R. 2977, the Space and Preservation Act of 2001. In this document, the United States government openly admits the existence of chemtrails. Still not enough proof. What if I told you that there are patents for these very such things? The image below is a 1975 U.S. patent issued to Donald K. Worrell, Romas Kasparas, Sidney Katz, assigned through the U.S. Navy, that describes a dispersion method for a powder contrail. Here are just a few more patents relating to chemtrails and geoengineering. Patent number 1619183, source, Friedrichsenline. com/1619183, PDF. Patent number 2045865, source, Friedrichsenline. com/2045865, PDF. Patent number 2591988, source, Friedrichsenline. com/2591988, PDF. Patent number 3437502, source, Friedrichsenline. com/3437502, PDF. Patent number 3531310, source, Friedrichsenline. com/3531310, PDF. How do chemtrails impact our food and water? Secretly filling the sky, without our knowledge or consent, mind you, with billions of megatons of aluminum, strontium-90, barium and chaff to reflect the sun's dangerous rays back into space is epic and brilliantly maneuvered on the unsuspecting public by dubbing them as persistent contrails. However, what goes up must come down, and we're being bombarded daily with a chemical and radioactive fallout surpassed only by Agent Orange, the defoliating chemicals developed by Monsanto to wipe out the jungles during the Vietnam War. Since aluminum has an affinity for water, all life forms attract these oxides. This causes contamination of even organic fruits, vegetables, and livestock if they're exposed to the open air, because plants readily absorb aluminum salts from the soil into their vascular systems. Everything absorbs aluminum salts, and it's in the air. Processed foods are filled with aluminum salts, and aluminum sulfate is added to water to make it clear. Apparently, we are in the aluminum age, and it's everywhere, but so unhealthy according to Dr. Christopher Exley, professor of bioinorganic chemistry at Keele University in the UK. Chemtrails are polluting our environment. The reality is that this toxic cloud shield, created by aerosolizing the atmosphere, diminishes rainfall, traps the heat, and increases humidity. This leads to a plague of pests, mildews, molds, fungi, diseases, and ultimately the shredding of our precious ozone layer that protects us from dangerous UV rays, according to Dane Wigington, a solar expert. In California's Mount Shasta region, Francis Mangle, a USDA wildlife biologist and water specialist, has reported elevated levels of aluminum, barium, and strontium in the mountain snow, polluting drinking water, rivers and soil in the area. In 2008, samples around California's Lake Shasta and the Pitt River arm tributary were tested in a state-certified lab following weeks of flyovers and chemtrails. The results of the water samples showed 4,610 parts per million of aluminum. This is 4,610 times the maximum contaminant level. With aluminum toxicity levels off the charts, chemtrails are putting our life systems at risk of irreparable damage. How are these visible chemtrails in the sky linked to cancer? As mentioned earlier, aluminum-laden chaff falling from the sky enters the lungs, causing upper respiratory diseases, lung cancer, breast cancer, and is the gateway to vulnerable areas of the body including arterial walls, where it accumulates like a plaque. In addition, aluminum toxicity generates a number of neurological disorders and brain cancer, while radium and zinc-cadmium sulfide synergistically cause bone cancer. A concerning new study published in the Journal of Inorganic Biochemistry demonstrates that exposure to aluminum can increase migratory and invasive properties of human breast cancer cells, while a 2012 article in the Journal of Applied Toxicology shows that aluminum promotes growth in human mammary epithelial cells. And, aluminum production has been classified as carcinogenic to humans by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC. Couple these studies with other recent studies indicating that aluminum binds to cellular estrogen receptors and may cause proliferation within hormone-sensitive tissues, and we understand why one research team coined a new term, metalloestrogen, to describe an entirely new class of metal-based endocrine disruptors, including aluminum, cadmium, and barium. Disturbingly, all of these metalloestrogens have been found in chemtrails. Moreover, these metalloestrogens, chemical toxins, and bioengineered cocktails are causing multiple problems in the gastrointestinal and immune systems, the first line of defense against disease, thus, destroying human health and cognitive abilities. Plus, shredding the ozone layer allows damaging UV rays to enter the atmosphere, resulting in an unprecedented increase in skin cancer cases, to name just a few harmful effects of chemtrails. I have been traveling in Central America, Europe, and the Middle East and noticed these patterns in the sky. I've also noticed unusually cold summers, trees dying and fungi infested, deformed vegetables just like the reports are describing. And a dramatic increase of cancer and unusual terminal illnesses are rampant. In conclusion, these are tumultuous times, and the global government appears to be up to something unbelievably sinister. It's the classic create a problem, devise the solution, and emerge as the hero with Monsanto's aluminum-resistant genetically modified, GM, seeds and GM trees. However, there is a growing concern that the earth will soon become unfit for organic food and pure water sources because of the unrestricted spraying without our consent. It appears that control of the masses has taken on a whole new meaning. Nonetheless, there is at least some encouraging news. According to Dr. Exley, there is an abundance of silicon in the environment that can detoxify the effects of aluminum poisoning, as can silica supplements. Also, EDTA chelation therapy can help remove toxic heavy metals from the body and restore vascular health. Other statements about the chemtrails. Chemtrails consist of nanobot polymers that are ingested by human beings. These polymers are microscopic and it enters the host through the air, water, and our food supplies. Chemtrail particulates are part of the weather patterns and they are designed to infect the entire human species, and there is nowhere human beings can hide. I know for a fact that these particulates are designed to compromise immune systems with time-delayed effects. The chemtrails can induce mood changes. The particulates are biospecific in that they can target certain groups of people. It is known that about 80% of the exposed population will eventually succumb and their compromised immune systems will eventually lead to their demise. From the models, it is theorized that the remaining 20% will be increasingly docile and relatively easy to control. When I look at what I know, I believe that chemtrails are going to destroy the food supply on this planet. What will replace it, I have no direct knowledge, but I suspect that this is the ultimate application of using food as a weapon. Male sperm counts are deliberately being impacted. There is no other conclusion than the creators of this technology want human beings to eventually stop reproducing. Does this blend in with transhumanism and its goals of morphing and controlling human beings? Since aluminum has an affinity for water, all life forms attract these oxides. This causes contamination of even organic fruits, vegetables, and livestock if they're exposed to the open air, because plants readily absorb aluminum salts from the soil into their vascular systems. Everything absorbs aluminum salts and it's in the air. Processed foods are filled with aluminum salts and aluminum sulfate is added to water to make it clear. Apparently, we are in the aluminum age and it's everywhere, but so unhealthy according to Dr. Christopher Exley, professor of bioinorganic chemistry at Keele University in the UK. Published in the Journal of Inorganic Biochemistry demonstrates that exposure to aluminum can increase migratory and invasive properties of human breast cancer cells, while a 2012 article in the Journal of Applied Toxicology shows that aluminum promotes growth in human mammary epithelial cells. And, aluminum production has been classified as carcinogenic to humans by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC. Couple these studies with other recent studies indicating that aluminum binds to cellular estrogen receptors and may cause proliferation within hormone-sensitive tissues, and we understand why one research team coined a new term, metalloestrogen, to describe an entirely new class of metal-based endocrine disruptors, including aluminum, cadmium, and barium. Disturbingly, all of these metalloestrogens have been found in chemtrails. Ty Bollinger concludes his research into these matters with the following excerpt. There is a growing concern that the Earth will soon become unfit for organic food and pure water sources because of the unrestricted spraying without our consent. It appears that, control of the masses, has taken on a whole new meaning. Back in 2014, Dane Wigington weighed in on this topic and stated that the food supply was being negatively impacted by chemtrails. Dane is a guest on my radio show this Sunday evening. Resume. The viability of our total food supply is being imperiled by chemtrails. Further, I am confident that low sperm counts are at least in part attributed to chemtrails. What I think it true, but I cannot totally confirm is to the degree that chemtrails are bioweapons with a definitive end game. I also cannot confirm the allegation that chemtrails are mood and behavior altering and for what purpose. Therefore, I am appealing to serious researchers to respond to this article with detailed references and research-based conclusions. There is obviously much more to come on this latest assault on humanity, and this is my way of shaking the trees to see what falls out. HARP Project. By Dave Hodges. HARP. The Pentagon's ultimate weapon. Known as Project HARP, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, the experiment involves the world's largest ionospheric heater, device designed to zap the skies hundreds of kilometers above the Earth with high-frequency radio waves. Why irradiate the charged particles of the ionosphere, which when energized by natural processes make up the lovely and famous phenomenon known as the Northern Lights? According to the U.S. Navy and Air Force, co-sponsors of the project, to observe the complex natural variations of Alaska's ionosphere. As well, admit the Pentagon, to develop new forms of communications and surveillance technologies to enable the military to send signals to nuclear submarines and to peer deep underground. Ever since the existence of HARP became public, a number of independent researchers have warned the operation has a secret agenda including weather modification, mind control, high-tech military experiments, triggering of earthquakes. HARP transmissions may also be used for the detection and monitoring of electromagnetic or plasma phenomena, precursors of seismic activity, and tectonic movement. Researchers believe HARP transmissions are actually being used to activate or trigger exactly the same electromagnetic conditions that can cause tectonic movement. As anti-HARP activists claim, HARP is the most dangerous project that the U.S. government has undertaken so far. Hidden by the innocent name of HARP is the ultimate death ray. When HARP's shot up, it can move clouds. When aimed at the ground it can cause earthquakes and tsunamis. According to Jerry Smith, an anti-HARP activist says that the U.S. military's desire is to harness the weather and use it as a weapon. Smith in his book HARP, The Ultimate Weapon of the Conspiracy, warns many atmospheric scientists working on the secretive military project might be unaware of HAARP's grave potential to wreak havoc on the Earth. He writes, "If HAARP is a TMT, Tesla magnifying transmitter, and these researchers correctly understand Tesla's work, we could be in a lot of trouble. It is quite possible that the scientists working on HAARP do not know what they are playing with. Beyond that, their ignorance might be compounded if HAARP is indeed a secretive Black Ops military project. The military has devised a way of keeping secrets called compartmentalization, where each unit knows only what it needs to know. Only the control group knows what's going on. If there is a control group familiar with TMTs directing the actions of scientists unschooled in Tesla technology, those lower-level operatives could be directed to wreak havoc with created weather or manufactured earthquakes. The key technology behind HAARP is the brainchild of scientist Bernard Eastlund. Judging from his APTI patent, Tesla was a major inspiration for Eastlund's ionospheric heater. A New York Times story, dated December 8, 1915, describes one of Tesla's ideas which are remarkably similar to Eastlund's. In 1966, Professor Gordon J. F. MacDonald was Associate Director of the Institute of Geophysics and Planetary Physics at the University of California, Los Angeles, a member of the U.S. President's Science Advisory Committee, and later a member of the U.S. President's Council on Environmental Quality. He published papers on the use of environmental control technologies for military purposes. MacDonald made a revealing comment. The key to geophysical warfare is the identification of environmental instabilities to which the addition of a small amount of energy would release vastly greater amounts of energy. World-renowned scientist MacDonald developed ideas for using the environment as a weapons system, and he contributed to what was, at the time, only in the wildest dream of a futurist. When he wrote his chapter, How to Wreck the Environment, for the book Unless Peace Comes, he was not kidding around. In it he describes the use of weather manipulation, climate modification, polar ice cap melting or destabilization, ozone depletion techniques, earthquake engineering, ocean wave control, brain wave manipulation using the planet's energy fields. He speculated these types of weapons would be developed and, when used, would be virtually undetectable by their victims. Is HAARP one such weapon? In her book Planet Earth, The Latest Weapon of War, renowned scientist and nuclear activist Dr. Rosalie Bertell says such electromagnetic weapons have the ability to transmit explosive and other effects such as earthquake induction across intercontinental distances to any selected target site on the globe with force levels equivalent to major nuclear explosions. Her book explains that pulsed, extremely low frequency (ELF) waves can be used to convey mechanical effects and vibrations at great distances through the Earth. Such manipulation of the Earth, she states, has the capability to cause disturbance of volcanoes and tectonic plates, which in turn, have an effect on the weather, creating storms and torrential rains over an area. Does anyone notice the world's weather has been very strange in the last years? Can we be sure that the climate is changing due to the activities of people, and not because of such devices as HAARP? Biography of Milco Baute. Milco Baute Lopez, a Cuban writer, editor, and educator of international acclaim, has woven a fascinating trajectory over the decades. His pen, infused with passion and creativity, has been a beacon of knowledge and artistic expression since 1992 when he began enlightening the world with his insightful articles. The most significant chapter of his life was written on December 10, 1995, when Milco moved to settle in the United States. This land of opportunities became his new home, and in 2001, with a profound sense of belonging, he embraced U.S. citizenship, merging his Cuban roots with his love for cultural diversity. The pursuit of knowledge and wisdom has always been a constant in Milco's life. This passionate autodidact, eager to nourish his intellect, embarked on a remarkable academic journey. He studied philosophy through an online course offered by the University of Edinburgh in the United Kingdom, and in 2016, he successfully completed his academic journey, becoming a graduate of this venerable institution. Milco Baute is not only an accomplished writer but also a prolific author. From 2008 to the present, he has given life to more than 80 books, showcasing his literary talent in both English and Spanish. In addition to his personal work, Milco plays a pivotal role in the publishing industry as an editor, writer, and distributor, collaborating with other authors to bring their stories to the world. One cannot fully grasp the rich palette of Milco's experiences without mentioning his technical background as a graduate in Cuba in 1986 as a technician in electrical power systems. This distinguished profession led him to practice his craft with skill for over 2 decades before his passion for writing and education led him down new paths. In summary, the life of Milco Baute Lopez is a symphony of creativity, perseverance, and dedication. His journey from the Cuban shores to the borders of the United States, through academic exploration and prolific literary production, is a testament to his unwavering spirit and commitment to cultural enrichment and knowledge in all its forms. Audiobook created by Baute Production Publisher. Telephone number, 813-693-8879. United States of America.